Hey guys, what's up? Hello and welcome to the movie discussion pocket dimension where time does not exist. The only thing that matters is film. That's Jay. I'm Cole, and we're back. And this is trying to think of the last few movies that we did. It's hard because they were more spaced out. As you can see, we're trying to get a little more consistency here going and not have such long breaks. I'm thinking of the last few movies we did. We need to talk about Kevin. That was the most recent one. But before that, wasn't that
Um,
the Godard one?
yeah,
Yeah, it was Alphaville, right?
yeah,
Yeah. So it's funny. It feels almost like this is obviously not that or anything, but in some ways we can't get away from Godard because way back um, when we did the Masters of Cinema, we of course did a Godard film, and then after we thought enough time was passed, okay, let's do another French New Wave movie, and I, forgetting it was Godard, picked another one of his movies. And now, of course, this is different. This is Chungking Express, but it's from a director, Kar-Wai, who is mostly compared to Godard of all the other film directors out there. He's the one they bring up the most. So that's kind of interesting how we can't seem to get
yeah.
away from him.
Our first Kar-Wai movie on here, I believe.
Yeah, which it I guess is a little surprising given we have tried to. He honestly could have been on the Masters in a way because even though he's still making films, he's if you look him up, he's highly regarded. Sight and Sound has him ranked as like the second or third best director ever, like not just like current or
Yeah,
anything like, but ever. His films are all very, not all, but I mean a lot of them are very highly critical hits and praised. And sometime when we're a bit more organized and we get a few more series going, we could probably do a series on the Hong Kong films. And I don't remember what wave he fits into. Speaking of wave, but there's different waves of filmmakers and directors, and he's a prominent one of, I want to say maybe the third wave, but I don't want to, don't quote me on that because I'm not sure. But that might be something to look into in the future. But in any case, he looms very large. He's one of the major figures of the Hong Kong film industry, sort of straddling the lines between the older way and then the later.
yeah,
Although for a guy that's been around since the late '80s, he's only made 10 full feature films, which is a little surprising. But maybe that's good because it's a quality over quantity type thing.
yeah.
But they're all very good. So very quickly, his first was As Tears Go By from 1988, then Days of Being Wild, which got him noticed. And then he did this Chungking Express in the same year that he did Ashes of Time. And this actually came out after Ashes of Time, which didn't do too well at its time. I think it was sort of confused people because it was like a wuxia type movie, but more in his sort of style. So it wasn't sort of the classic formula. And so he sort of bounced back. Not that Ashes of Time is bad or anything. And then that was his most productive period was definitely the mid 90s because he did this and Ashes of Time in 94 and 95. He did Fallen Angels. In 97, he did Happy Together, which is a very famous movie, especially in queer cinema, considering it's a 1997 movie dealing with gay, two male gay romantic leads. Anyway, really, so sort of a groundbreaking movie in its sense. I was trying to look up like exactly like what his releases were like because when you think about queer cinema over here, it's been around for decades, but they were usually more independent things.
Yeah,
And it seems like 2006 when we had ironically directed by a Chinese director Brokeback Mountain, that seemed like the big breakthrough for like a queer story to be told in like sort of a big mainstream movie. And that's 2006. So this is 1997, which is, predating by quite a bit. And I mean, it's not like that was some small release. He was a big established filmmaker at the time. So, and of course, then In the Mood for Love, very sexy film, which also has Tony Leung in it. I haven't seen his 2004 movie 2046. I'm not even sure what it's supposed to be. My Blueberry Nights, and then The Grandmaster in 2013, which is not part of the Ip Man series, but it's just another film about Ip Man. This one being a slightly older Ip Man, where Tony Leung once again plays the lead. It's a very beautiful film. I saw it years ago, not really understanding the context, but now I know more about it. It's a really interesting film. Probably the most well-made of the Ip Man films, but not necessarily the most, but probably not the most exactly exciting. I mean, I would say go for the Donnie Yen ones, really, if you want great martial arts, and those of course are well-made films too. But I'm just saying, anyway, jumping around. But yes, but Wong Kar-Wai has loomed large for quite a few years. I know this film in particular, we've mentioned this before when this come up, was a favorite of Quentin Tarantino. To the point.
Say what you want about Tarantino, man. I mean, at least he was bringing this stuff to North American audiences, like where we may not have seen it otherwise.
Well, I mean,
he had a
direct influence of this movie,
yeah,
in that he basically signed a deal with Miramax to get his own company for releasing stuff because he wanted to distribute this in the US.
Mm-hmm.
So this was like the main reason for that back in the day. And yeah, I know I poke fun at Tarantino because I really don't like Reservoir Dogs. And I say he liked Hong Kong cinema so much that he just took City on Fire and remade it himself, which is always sort of miffed me, but whatever.
It's not cool. Like
it's not like he doesn't show his work and talk about where his influences come from. So let that slide. So yeah.
I know when he finally did get popularity, post, Pulp Fiction and stuff, you would see Quentin Tarantino presents on a lot of stuff. I know a lot of the, Hong Kong, martial arts movies I saw were like that. Would have the Quentin Tarantino presents stamp on there. So, I mean, he is, at heart a fan of cinema. So,
right.
Like or hate his films or whatever, but, at least he's doing that. So I can appreciate that, which is kind of the opposite of what Miramax was doing, which was basically just cutting up films and making them into something completely different. But,
Mm-hmm. I mean, my favorite film by his is the first Kill Bill, if you break them down to volumes, is Kill Bill 1, which is structurally and story-wise, it's just sort of like his own version of Lady Snowblood, a Japanese film that we did on here. And of course, but in addition to Japanese cinema, it borrows from Hong Kong cinema. And it borrows, of course, from Westerns and things like that, and even some anime. So that's I'll always like the Kill Bill movies. They're at the top for me, because it's done well. It's not always done well. I mean, who directed The Man with the Iron Fist? That's another Presents one, right? That's just one he presented. I don't think he directed.
I know it stars RZA, the Wu-Tang rapper. I'm not sure.
Because that was part of that whole mid-2000s wave, and again, we can say some of it is because of Tarantino bringing awareness to this, because we talked about this before when we talked about martial arts movies, which I'm always going on about. But like in the mid-2000s, there was sort of a resurgence over here, and you saw movies like that getting theatrical releases over here, and then you had sort of a mishmash like The Man with the Iron Fist, which on paper sounds like something I should love, but it's just not a good movie. But
I wanted to like it, but
I wanted to like it, but it's kind of crappy.
Man, that was 10 years ago. Good God.
I would have thought it might have even been more, because I just sort of remember that era of basically post Kill Bill up for like the next like 6 or 7 years. You had some of that stuff,
and it is directed by the RZA as well. So
wow. Maybe he's not so great as a director, I might have to say.
I wouldn't imagine he has too much experience, but I guess first time film, good job. I don't know.
I suppose. Yeah. I mean, for first time film, he had some big names to work with. Not too many people get that luxury. But anyway, speaking of names, like a lot of directors, that we know and that we've talked about, Wong Kar-Wai. And by the way, just heads up, people, I'm sure I'll be very inconsistent in the way that I name Chinese actors, because some of them I'm very familiar with saying their names the way you would say it in China with the last name first, and others I still say it the Western flipped around way. So there'll probably be some inconsistency for me there when I'm naming some actors. I might do one way and another that way. It's just the way my brain is linked to them.
Well, anyway, it's also how they're listed on a lot of things that you're looking at. They'll be listed the traditional way we're used to.
And I guess whatever I saw the most of is how it would work in my brain. So if I saw like the westernized one the most, like for somebody like a Tony Leung, plus it helps with a lot of these actors, they have, they take those Western first names. But I was just going to say, so like a lot of directors, he has like a bunch of actors that he's used over and over again throughout the years. Tony Leung being a good example. Had a thing, about casting here. So let's see. Tony Leung himself is in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of his movies. So he's by far the most because he's got 10 movies, and Tony Leung is in 7 of them. And I don't think he's in a small role in any of them. I think he's a major role in every single one. Whereas like his contemporary Andy Lau was in the first 2. So that's one of the reasons why Days of Being Wild is a really notable film, is that it has Andy Lau and Tony Leung together. I always think of them as like probably the biggest sort of Chinese leading men type actors of their generation. As far as being actors, I give Tony Leung maybe a slight advantage. I think of Tony Leung as one of the best actors of his generation, period, not just China, just anywhere. And it is nice that, I guess, in having some Western roles, like he's in the Marvel film, oh god, the martial arts one, the Shang-Chi movie. He's in the Shang-Chi movie. And I think for a lot of people, that was like their introduction to it. Of course, he's older now. I guess he might even be like 60 or something like that now, but he's still such a really good actor with such a presence. Actually, this movie is one of the few where for most scenes, that's kind of played down a bit. Like if you're used to seeing Tony Leung, like he like absolutely smolders in most of his roles. He's like an intense guy. The only scene you really get that from is the flashback scene where he's remembering his ex-girlfriend, when they have sort of, it's not a sex scene, but sort of a steamy makeout scene, which was somewhat, definitely not the rule back then for a lot of Chinese movies, whether it was mainland or Hong Kong, not getting too graphic. A lot of these movies you watch, like you might see the romantic leads have like a hug, and that's about it. Whereas this shows more. So you see some of his like his, as I said, smoldering sexuality in that scene, and but for the rest of the movie, it's kind of subdued. But who else have we got in that stable? Leslie Chung, of course, probably would have been in more. He was in 3, but he died. Very sad. We'll talk about Leslie Chung someday. I will very very quickly touch on when I was talking about queer cinema, and I was talking about Happy Together. What's interesting there is, like, of your 2 romantic leads, Tony Leung is one, and Leslie Chung is the other. Now, Tony Leung, I believe, is straight. Leslie Chung was famously bisexual, but he was bisexual in such a way that it seemed, again, I could be wrong, he seemed to project that he was attracted to women, but his romantic attachments and the things, his most important relationships were with men. But anyway, and he was such an icon, again, ahead of his time, really brought some of that androgyny and sexual ambiguity to his roles. It's kind of funny too when I don't want to go on a tangent here because we have other stuff to talk about, but when you think about China, of course, how conservative it was and still is when it comes to like queer stuff, it's interesting how much they didn't that androgyny and sexual ambiguity is actually a big part of their culture in a lot of history and fantasy and things like that, and nobody seemed to bat an eye about it. Like the last thing I watched recently that had Leslie Chung in it is The Bride with the White Hair, which is a fantasy wuxia movie. And in that, like the bad guys start off as like these two, a male and a female conjoined twin, but at certain times they sort of blend into like one sort of, androgynous being. It's really interesting, and stuff like that pops up all over Chinese cinema. But I mean, when it just came to something like Happy Together, maybe it was a little different because it wasn't a fantasy, it wasn't a legend, it was just contemporary China, and here's, a romance between 2 gay men. But anyway, yeah, so Leslie Chung was a great talent. He was also a pop singer, and he sadly took his own life. I think he was in his 40s, I think. I want to say Leslie Chung was 46 years old. So very sad. So maybe sometime we'll do a movie that he was in, because he's not in this one, but I was just pointing out some of the other people in there. Of course, the great Maggie Cheung is in 5 of his films. And good enough. I've done enough name checking. But anyway, getting back to the main ones in this, we have Tony Leung, sometimes called Tony Leung Chiu-Wai, to differentiate him from another actor also named Tony Leung, but not nearly as famous, so I don't think you really had to worry that much. Bridget Lin, Takashi Kaneshiro, and or that's everybody. Yeah. So those are the main 4. Yeah. So and Faye Wong. Faye Wong was a Cantopop star. She still is, actually. She briefly retired, but she came out of retirement like 10 years ago, and she's still out making albums and performances and things like that. So she
And
gives a pretty cool performance for somebody who's like acting wasn't her main thing.
don't forget the manager of the restaurant, the Midnight Express, is Piggy Chan.
Yeah, that's right.
I would hope that wasn't his given name.
I don't think so. But yeah. So we'll start with the title, because a lot of people might think this movie might be about a train.
Yeah.
Or, something near a train, but it's just a mashup. What it is it's just blending together two names. Chungking Mansions was an apartment complex, a pretty cheap one that that the director grew up in. It would have been in the Kowloon walled city, which again we don't have time to go into, but you should look that up if you're not familiar. It doesn't exist anymore. It's been torn down, but it existed basically from the 60s right into the mid 90s. It was actually, if anybody remembers the film Bloodsport with Jean-Claude Van Damme, you get that's where the tournament is held, and you also get a very quick sort of rundown of what it is when they're walking in. When the Chinese guy meets them, he's like their guide. He's telling them, he's like, "Come on into Kolong Walled City," and he said some stuff, and it's all true. Basically, it was like a big section that housed many people and businesses that was sort of cut off from the rest of civilization, and there was almost no law there, and people lived in squalor, but also some people lived well on top of each other, and there's no regulation for anything. So as far as like electricity goes, some areas might have it, some don't, and it was a fascinating place that finally they basically bulldozed, because it was sort of a black eye for the Chinese government to allow this to go on for so long. But I just mean, when people talked about things like black markets and illegal activity, Kowloon was the place to go, because there were no rules and no cops, and of course there was tons of crime. But some people, just because they were poor, had to live there. So it'd be interesting to find a movie that follows that. But anyway, so that is where the Chungking comes from. And Express is simply taking the name of the sort of central location of that diner was called Midnight Express. So that's all that is. It's just a mashup.
Which has also been bulldozed and is now a 7-Eleven.
Yeah, kind of sad. Progress. Nothing lasts forever. But there's less of it in this movie. But I was thinking, another thing is, a few weeks ago I watched the Jackie Chan film. It's a little different from most of his, because it's supposed to be mostly a serious cop drama, although they still throw some of his elements in there, called Crime Story. It's from like 1990 or so. And while it's a Jackie Chan film where he plays a cop and he gets in fights and stuff, it actually is more of a serious crime drama, because it's based on a true story about like a billionaire who got kidnapped for ransom and how it went wrong and anything like that. But anyway, there's a whole big section of that movie that's in like one of those big buildings, many that they had there, that had like sort of those like market stalls in them. I don't know what to say, but like, if you remember Resident Evil 6, no matter what path you take in the game, all three paths, the various character scenarios, you'll wind up in China, especially Chris's scenario. And there's a part in Chris's scenario where you're in a building that looks identical to that, where it's just sort of like floor after floor of just sort of like open sort of market stalls, and it's all very narrow. There's a little bit of this in this movie, but not as a complex, but on the streets. And it just gave me a flicker of recognition seeing it go by. So not that it really matters, but because most people aren't going to know this, and it's not like I knew this, but finding out there is some artistic license as far as the geography of this works, but only people that live around there would really know that. So there's some stuff where some things are suggested to be next to each other, which wouldn't be, and there's also something about planes flying when they wouldn't be, and things like that. Anyway, and none of it really matters. But I did find that out, that it does take some artistic liberties with the locations. It doesn't really matter.
So I guess before we get into it, I wanted to ask you, obviously we've got two separate stories.
Right.
Was that was the Midnight Express in the first one? And in the first story, or was that okay?
Yeah, that's sort of what links them. So they're not, I guess you would call them overlapping stories, is really what they are.
See, who was May? I know May worked there.
Right. So there's two Mays, and one we never see.
But I know May is his daughter. Is that right, or is just an employee
Just an
of
employee.
the guy that works there or the guy that owns the
Yeah.
place?
So a quick
Okay.
rundown of the maze is that the character played by Takashi Kaneshiro, by the way, people wondering about the Japanese name, he was Chinese Japanese. His mother was Han Chinese, and he was born in Taiwan, but to a Japanese father. So he was bilingual, and most of his work is in the Chinese, specifically Hong Kong film industry. I've actually seen him in quite a few things. He's in House of Flying Daggers. Speaking of that wave of things that got over here, I actually own the Blu-ray for that. He's in The Warlords from like about 2012, and he's in John Woo's big war epic Red Cliff. So he's been around. He's still there. He was sort of a heartthrob back in the day, which is not too surprising. But anyway, getting off track there. So anyway, his character. So in the movie, his character had just broken up with his girlfriend, who was named May, and who we never see, but he talks about. And then at the Express, the owner recommends he ask out the employee May, and he brushes it off. And by the time he asks, he's too late because she started dating someone else. And then towards the end of the movie, it's come around again, although we don't see her come back. Is that when Tony Leung's character 663 is talking to the diner. The diner mentions that May just recently came back and is apparently available again. So those are the Mays.
Okay. See, I was getting May and Faye. Is that her name? Yeah,
Yeah,
Faye mixed up.
and
So
I'm sure that's a little bit on purpose, right? Because going, it's interesting. Okay, so sometimes you have movies. Most movies have a cast of characters, and the characters have names, except for minor ones. Every once in a while, you have a movie where everybody gets a name, and maybe there's some mysterious character, and they're not named. And then you have the opposite of that. You have a movie like what we covered on here, The Driver, where they don't name any characters. Nobody in that movie is named. Then you have a movie like this that names some characters and doesn't name others. It's kind of a weird stylistic choice to make. Both our lead male characters are Hong Kong cops, but that seems to be all they really have in common with each other. And I'm trying to get my name straight here, so I get this right. Just a quick look at the names. Oh yeah, so he's Chi-Wai, but he does identify himself as by the numbers. I guess they mean bad numbers. He does say he's 223, but he does also give us his name. But in the case of Tony Leung's character, all we know is his number 663. So that's kind of weird, but that's how they decide to do it. But yeah, I figure the Faye thing is kind of like deliberate. Plus, for one thing, the actress's name in real life is Faye, and they probably thought, hey, let's have her play the character, because it'd be kind of weird that like he goes from May and then bumps into Faye, because that's how his story, or in the movie, ends. Is he comes back and says, well, what about May? She's like, he's gone. Oh yeah, no, he'd already said like I made it. He's like, because he said like he's like dumped by two girls named May in the same night. Yeah, which is not exactly true, but you get the reach he's making. And he's just like, I made up my mind never to date a girl named May again. And then it's like, well, how about Faye? But then he collides with her, but then he goes out of the story, and it goes on from there. So yeah, that's how it ends. They both.
Okay.
It's interesting because both characters are cops who obviously work in the same general area, and they both frequent that diner, but there's no indications that they know each other at all. Although, since this is a movie with narration, so it's being told as a story past tense, at the very end of the first cop's story, where he says, but when he bumps into her, he actually says, but I didn't have a shot with her because 6 hours later, she fell in love with this guy. Which seems to suggest at some point in the future, he met them and they told him the story. But anyway, it's kind of interesting. But now, I'm not good at faces, and it's even worse, I guess, if they're Chinese. But I will just say there is a part in the movie early on where it is following Bridget Lynn's character, the mysterious not named lady in the wig, where she is going to go into one of those like stores that's full of merchandise, and as she's about to go in, it very much looks like Faye comes out carrying a giant Garfield. Is that not Faye?
Well, there is a giant Garfield in the movie, so that makes sense.
Yeah, so it actually shows Faye buying it and walking out with it, because I figured, okay, another short-haired girl, that's got to be Faye, and I think it's just a little bump. They don't interact. It's just some foreshadowing that we're going to see Faye later.
Because
I didn't catch it till the second time I watched it this time. I was like, that's got to be Faye.
Because 626 or 663, I'm sorry, has a giant like fuzzy dog, like stuffed animal, and she replaces that with Garfield at one point. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I was pretty sure. Yeah. So that pretty much confirms it. It's kind of an interesting nod, especially if it's the second time watching the movie, because you probably won't catch it the first time.
Yeah.
Because you're not paying attention to the woman walking out. But yeah, that's obviously Faye. And what's interesting is that suggests, because the timeline works, that happens afterwards. So Faye didn't buy it for him. She just happened to already have it.
Yeah.
Because while something that the director Wong Kar-Wai likes to do is tell stories out of sequence, this really isn't. It just sort of goes from one to the other. Actually, the movie starts on April 28th, 1994. So that would be my 11th birthday. And so it's obviously spring of 94. And then at the very end, you have a time jump of a year. But most of it is spring of 94, starting on the evening of April 28th, 1994.
Yep. And he shares a birthday with my mother.
May 30th. Or May 1st. Yeah, May 1st. Sorry, May 1st, yeah. So that's the other thing about May. So we'll get into our character, who I really relate to. I actually have to say I relate to his character a lot. The way he seems to view certain things and some of his, quirks and things like that. So the story is she broke up with him on April 1st, which is April Fool's Day. And the way he saw it was, so it's a joke. Or it'll be confirmed as a joke if by a month later, May 1st, she comes back. That will confirm it as a joke. And also, her name is May, and May 1st is his birthday. So he decides that since she likes pineapples, he starts buying canned pineapples, all with the expiry date of May 1st. To the point, as he gets closer, it becomes more and more difficult. And there's kind of a funny scene where it's the day before, and he's asking the guy at the store, I need them with this. And the guy's like, what are you talking about? That expires tomorrow. He's like, what is your obsession with freshness? And the guy's like, I don't have any obsession with freshness. I just work here. It's a kind of an amusing conversation they have.
He does, in fact, like pineapple.
He does. I like how when he meets Bridget Lynn's character, which we have to say since she isn't given a name, like when he sees her at the bar, he says, I had the perfect opening line to break the ice. And it's, do you like pineapple?
And it was in Cantonese the first time, Mandarin, I think even Japanese at one point.
Yeah, he actually ends with Mandarin, which is kind of weird because you think that would be the second thing you would try for. Because he even says English. And then she just says, she says, your Mandarin's pretty good. He goes, I grew up in Taiwan, which is the truth about the actor. The actor did grow up in Taiwan. So, yeah, little nods like that too.
How different are those two languages, Cantonese and Mandarin? I know there's both Chinese, but like,
I've never gotten a straight answer, from people. I asked my girlfriend this, who spoke Mandarin. She always made it sound like it was close enough that they could understand each other, but it still took effort or something. We almost had this conversation way back when we did the Swedish/Norwegian movie Insomnia, because there's a scene in the original Insomnia, obviously it wouldn't be in the remake, which takes place in Alaska, where they speak English, because it's about two Swedish cops that have crossed the border up north into Norway. And there's a whole scene where they come down and they're interviewing the classmates of the victim at the high school. And when one of them takes the boyfriend aside and is asking him stuff, the guy's like, I can't understand you. He's like, I don't know what the hell you're saying, which is more like, I think, a joke. I think he does understand. And in looking into that, it was sort of the same thing. It was like, Swedish people can understand Norwegian people and vice versa. It's pretty darn close, but there's still enough differences to cause, I guess, confusion.
Sure.
I don't know. As somebody who learned tiny little bits of Mandarin, I don't know structurally if it has any difference from Cantonese. I would guess not. But if you watch a lot of Chinese movies like I do, you can sort of pick out the difference if you're used to hearing them. Cantonese has a much stronger accent to like a foreigner's ears like us. When they're speaking Cantonese, they're almost always like having a lot heavier accents. Like they'll end words really strong. It's like wah, kind of like go
Oh,
for a
okay.
while.
Yeah.
Mandarin doesn't do that as strongly. So that's as a foreigner, that's kind of the easiest way to tell the difference. Is Cantonese sounds more exaggerated, stronger, kind of harsher, I would say. It's really put up. I'm used to seeing it, of course, in Hong Kong action movies, right? So a lot of the time, the acting of that is somewhat suspect anyway. So a lot of the characters are giving over the top, exaggerating performances, which really brings it out. Because I assume you could probably make Mandarin sound that way if you wanted. But anyway, that's how I always make the difference. So again, for people that don't know, most Chinese are mainland Chinese and they speak Mandarin, but Hong Kong and some of the surrounding districts is Cantonese. And again, I don't want to get into political things or things like that. But the other thing is, I don't know how aware the average movie viewer is of the difference between Hong Kong and China as far as the film industry goes, because they were separate industries. And since they came together in 1997, it has not been exactly a smooth transition. In many ways, people like me think it kind of not was the end of the Hong Kong industry, but it was definitely the end of an era and changed things. I mean, you could also say that about some of like the classic Hong Kong action, especially action. Obviously, this through the lens of action. You say, well, because a lot of its stars were getting older, and we didn't have an next generation to come, but also just the industry itself changed in
They
that it
obviously
had
had.
to deal with government interference, which is something they were free from in the Hong Kong
Well,
movies.
that's what I was going to say. They had a lot more freedom in the
Yeah,
subject matter.
yeah,
Because you're not going to
like all
see like
sorts of.
the bride with white hair coming out of China, mainland China.
Probably not the year it came out. I don't know. Again, it is interesting because the point I was making was most Chinese audiences were used to that sort of stuff just coming from their own legends and history in a way. So I'm not sure what censors might have thought of it.
But
It,
aren't they like really big on like ghost stuff? Like they don't like that in movies at all.
it's weird because they do have their own version of it, but they seem to have a problem with foreign versions of it, right? To the point like Ghostbusters was a problem.
Yeah.
It's almost like they just like the Chinese version of how ghosts are portrayed, and they find other versions incorrect. I don't even want to say like it's not even necessarily a religious blasphemy thing. I don't know, because China is not a particularly religious country as far as the government goes. Although, I mean, it certainly bends that way when it needs to. Just see what they've been doing to the Muslims who live in China, right? But yeah, I don't know, because there are plenty of, because that's another thing that was sort of subgenre of some of those Hong Kong fantasy movies, where there ones there were most of them were comedies. Where there's a lot of horror comedy from that era. Sammo Hung's in a few. Mr. Vampire's the big one with the hopping vampires, because that was what Chinese vampires are like. They don't walk or run; they hop. It's very funny. But yeah, it's interesting because most of those Asian cultures, like China, Korea, Vietnam, Thailand, their perception of spirits and ghosts is, as far as religion and tied up in folklore and stuff like that, it's much more present in their everyday lives than for us. Obviously, you can talk to people around here and they say, yeah, I believe in ghosts, or I believe I saw a ghost once, or my aunt saw a ghost once, or felt a spirit and stuff like that.
Right.
That's kind of more normal in those cultures. Also, the way they think of it, because in like Christianity, most people think you have somebody who dies and they go to heaven. It's like they go to heaven and maybe they can look down on the earth. It's like I felt my mother watching me, but there's nothing in Christianity, as far as I know, that talks about like ghosts and spirits having this presence on earth. It's like once they're gone, they're gone. Maybe they can look at us from heaven, but they're not here. Whereas in a lot of like Buddhism and things like that, I don't want to say Buddhism, things like that, but I just mean, again, some of these religions and beliefs in the Asian countries, the idea is very much that they're still present. They're dead, now they're spirits, but they're not off in heaven. Maybe they can be if they feel like it, but they spend a lot of time here around us too. And we don't see them, but we feel them. So I don't know, maybe they thought something like Ghostbusters was some sort of like a weird, inaccurate, or insensitive portrayal of that. I like making and I don't want to say because it's making light of it, because again, there's plenty of, specifically, I can think of Chinese horror comedies that have like spirits in sort of a goofy, sort of wacky type of scenario. So I don't understand the sensitivity to it. I don't get exactly the what's behind it. Really, I'd have to look into it more, because it's not like they're anti-ghosts in many ways. Again, it's a big part of their culture. Oh yeah, ghosts, spirits, yeah, they're all over the place. I don't know. It's weird.
I wonder if they allowed the newer Ghostbusters film, Afterlife.
Oh yeah, I don't know why they would. I mean, Afterlife seems to
Right.
follow the same sort of rules as the other ones, as far as like ghosts materializing and people trapping them, or I don't know.
I was just curious because that was a big. They say one of the big reasons why that film wasn't more successful. The 2005 Ghostbusters, whatever year that was.
Was there a 2005 Ghostbusters?
No, 2015. Shit, I'm way
2016,
off.
if you mean the one with
16.
the women.
Yeah,
2016, yeah.
I was way off.
Yeah, that's why I had the question. I was like, what? No way I would have heard of that. I did watch Afterlife like a couple months ago. It sort of just washed over me. It was fine. I'll just say I don't love Ghostbusters the way some of our friends do. I really like the first movie, but that's kind of it. Like I don't love like the franchise. I didn't care that much. I watched the cartoon when it was on, but it didn't make a big deal impression on me. And the second movie I always thought falls well short of the first as far as quality. I think the first is great, an absolute classic. I love it, but I don't love like the Ghostbusters brand or franchise or anything like that. So, but the other thing I thought of watching this new movie was I do have some hard opinions on it though, because I thought the setting didn't work. To me, Ghostbusters is just intrinsically tied to the city of New York. So seeing Ghostbusters activity in like some small Midwestern town just felt off for me. So that was kind of my main complaint about the movies. I didn't like the setting.
I was okay with it for a one-time watch. Probably not something I care to go back and revisit, but it's the same thing I was saying about everything. Like, let's get some new characters in here, which I mean they did, but in
They
a
did.
Star Wars reboot type of thing.
Yeah. But I mean, at least in Star Wars, they were character. I don't know. I don't want to, because I mean, the kids were proactive and did do things, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not much of a fan of that. I don't mind kids being around, but having it center on kids, I don't know. But again, people are like, it's Ghostbusters. How seriously are you going to take this? Okay, fine. I don't care. Kids could be Ghostbusters too. What the hell? I don't care.
Well, and I'm kind of tired of saying, like, was it Finn Wolfhard or whatever his name is and everything?
Well, let me guess. He's a Stranger Things kid. Yeah.
He's also in
Okay.
It, both the It movies.
Yeah. Seems to be his niche, right? It's like if there's like some supernatural paranormal stuff that a bunch of kids get into, he's front and center for it.
He does a great Richie though. I got to hand it to him. That's
I like
kind of like what you.
That's one of the
imagine.
things I really was impressed with about the It movie was how they moved the setting. They were kids in the late 80s instead of the late 50s. And obviously they had to change things and update the dialogue for that, but the spirit was still getting across. Like him and Eddie, their dialogue is different than it is in the book, but it's all the same spirit. And I liked that very much. I thought they pulled that off really well. Yeah. I liked It part 1. I didn't like part 2, but that's not because it was so bad. It's just that was how they chose to do the movies. The book goes back and forth. The movie's divided, past and present. Although I will give the second one does have some more flashbacks with the kids in it. But yeah. I remember seeing that in the theater. I haven't even watched it all the way through the second time because I found the final act drag so much. They're down in the sewers fighting that thing forever. Yes. I was like, this doesn't have to be this long. Like it's
very, very bloated.
Yeah, I don't like an anticlimax where you take care of the bad guy like that and it's too easy. I get it. But this, it just kept going and going. I was like, holy Christ, is this sequence ever going to end when they're down in the sewers? But anyway, I still really like part 1.
When they released the casting of the adult, the grown-up children,
yeah,
I was like, oh, why? I mean, I like all the actors too. I love Bill Hader; he does a great job. But
yeah, I like Bill Hader.
Let's get the big name in here every time. It just sucks for those talented actors that aren't discovered out there.
That's true. I mean, I'm a fan of that actress. I talk about her a lot.
I know who you're talking about. I can't think of her name now.
But anyway, but that was one thing I didn't like about the early. I didn't like the actress cast as young Beck or whatever. I found her very tomboyish, and I know you're just gonna say because she has short hair and she hung around with boys. I'm like, no, I just mean compared to Bev. Sorry, Bev. I didn't like that
Bev.
actress as Bev. She didn't fit at all to me. She didn't fit in with the others, and I also just didn't think she had anything remotely like the character in the book.
She smokes cigarettes and gets sexually abused.
I mean, that is in the book, but that's for sure. But no, I mean,
Jessica
she didn't.
Chastain.
Yeah, Jessica Chastain. I don't know the name of the younger actress who I'd seen in some things. For instance, she plays the young. She's played the young version of Jessica Chastain, and she also played the young version of. Oh my god! Now I can't think of anybody's. Amy Adams. She plays the young version of Amy Adams in Sharp Objects.
Did you watch that?
Yep.
Okay. I'm sure we talked about it.
I liked it until the end. I did not like the resolution.
Mm-hmm.
It's about 6 or 7 episodes. So that was pretty solid, but then I did not like what, the whole thing. Yeah, I didn't like the end. Can't blame that one on Stephen King. That's not Stephen King.
You're a big Amy Adams fan, so we know you enjoyed
it. I wish that wasn't her, but she's fine in it. I think people have gotten the wrong impression about how I feel about Amy Adams. I just think she's just completely wrong for Lois Lane is really where all that comes from. She's too sweet and pleasant. Yeah. She's too sweet and pleasant to play Lois Lane. But anyway, yeah, the whole ghost thing, like you said, it's not something I fully understand either. I'll have to look into it. Speaking of boyish short hair, that's what Faye is in this with Faye Wong. She's very much the manic pixie dream girl archetype. All those things, she's independent-minded and free-spirited and quirky. Check, all those things.
Yeah.
For sure, but I don't want to jump around. We'll start in the first story. So it's also interesting the way that the tone shifts too, because the first story has some darkness to it and even some violence. And then the second story is much more sunny and kind of a romantic comedy. So it's an interesting shift that probably caught audiences off guard. Probably caught me off guard years ago. The first time I saw the movie, yes, I have seen this movie. It was so many years ago, I couldn't remember most of it, but I remembered that much. I remember the first story was a bit darker. And I was saying to Jay before we went on, it was good that I got a chance to watch it one more time for a second viewing before we did this, because it's very easy to kind of forget about the first half and how it felt once you finish the movie. It almost like it wipes it out like it didn't happen, because the opening credits are very dark and moody. It's very it's the city at night, and it's very darky. Jeez, that sounds like fucking racist. What am I saying? It's very dark. And kind of like it seems like it's gonna be like a noirish film, film noir crime type thing. The music chimes in with it very much, and even the first voiceover comes across that way. But the way the movie ends on some pleasant music and the daylight and everything. Actually, it ends with a Wong herself doing a cover of the Cranberry song Dreams, in case you thought in case you were thinking that's a really familiar song, but how come I don't know it? And it's sung in Cantonese. It's because she covered it. So,
I was going to get there eventually, but we discussed the Cranberries last week.
Right. So
what are the chances?
Yeah, we were on some, I can't even remember whose. It might not even exist anymore, but we were talking about, and I got mixed up, and I said that Shirley Manson, lead singer of Garbage, had passed away, but I was wrong. I was mixing her up with somebody O'Riordan, who is the lead singer of Cranberries. She is the one who passed away a couple years ago, so I had that mixed up. But yes, I was thinking that too. As soon as it took a while too to remember what it was, because I actually have that song somewhere, because I've always because I did a deep dive on Cantopop many years ago, so I have some songs from there, and I always preferred that version just because I just like her voice better. I think Faye Wong's a better vocalist, but I hadn't listened to it in so long. I was like, why is this so familiar? Obviously, I shouldn't know this Chinese song. It's like, it's not a Chinese song. Right. It's freaking it's a Cranberry song.
Right. That's what I was like. Man, I know that. What?
Yeah.
Okay, they did this in another language here, but no, it's her.
Yeah.
So that's really cool.
Music's a big part of this movie. It's all pretty much Western music, which is a bit of an oddity. It's not like Chinese movies hadn't used Western music before, but it's all Western music. Um, each half sort of has a song. The first half, I can't remember the name of the song, but it's a reggae song that gets replayed a few times. Usually they show it getting played on a jukebox at a bar where some of the action happens. And then in the second half is the Mamas and the Papas song, California Dreamin', which, despite its status as, for many decades an all-time classic, is played so much in this movie that you might get sick of it.
I think I could go the rest of my life without ever hearing that song again. I'd be okay.
I love the song, but they must start that song over about 7 or 8 times in the movie.
Yeah.
I was so happy that they didn't end with it. I was like, oh, thank God they didn't end with
it. Jumping around a little bit, but do you think he's just in the diner, like just that song's on repeat all day long? Just waiting for her to come in?
Because that's one thing, right? Like, you can either think that, like, obviously he doesn't know if he's ever going to see her again, and he's now bought the diner and that song is playing when she comes up. Like, or maybe he just did genuinely start to like it. And it's just, serendipity that she comes in and he's listening to it because now he really likes the song. Because when he plays it over at his apartment, it's kind of funny because you don't know how much he's lying. Because after he catches her at the apartment, she's like, "Can I go now?" He's like, "No, stay. We'll put on some music." He grabs the near CD and puts it on. She's like, "I didn't know you liked this song." And he's like, "Oh, well, my girlfriend liked it." And she's like, in her voiceover, she's like, "That's my CD. I left it here before." So it's like, we know he's lying on one level, but do we know that, like, that's not even his CD? Like, is he just saying, like, oh, it's probably one of my girlfriend's songs, and he's just lying that he got to like it? Or has he actually noticed that she left her own CD and he's lying about that?
I don't think he noticed. Honestly, I don't think he was just clueless. Yeah, and just assumed that was his.
Assumed it was his girlfriend's. Yeah.
But yeah, we're talking about the second one. Obviously, I enjoyed the second part much more than the first, but
I enjoyed the second part more than the first, but I like the other cop's character a bit more, just because I relate to him. I think a bit for his.
Well, they're both very lovesick guys. Like, they're both really, really determined to get into a romantic relationship.
Right, they're both in the wake of their relationship ending, and the first guy is somewhat in denial of it. Right, he's thinking, within him, she'll come back. He's calling her parents' house where she is, and he's like, "Oh no, I didn't call for her. I came to talk to you guys, see how you guys are doing." Trying to not make it sound like he's a stalker and things like that. And of course, he's doing the thing with the canned pineapple quite obsessively. So yeah, and he does have an interesting reaction, which is one thing that makes him different from me. Is once he's in the bar drinking, and the time has passed now. He has now turned. His birthday has happened. It's a sign to him she's not coming back. He says in the voiceover, like, "I was determined to fall in love with the next woman that came through the door," and that happens to be Bridget Lynn, which is probably not how it would work for me, but in a lot of other ways, I do relate to him and his ideas. And plus, he is young; he only just turned 25, so maybe he's a little more optimistic about certain things.
He's not jaded yet.
He's not jaded yet. It's funny. Maybe I relate to him more, but the other guy's situation is a little closer to a situations I've been in type thing. I mean, I only ever lived with one girl. When that was over, that was over. But some of the other stuff about that. I will say, since we are jumping around again, the scene where he runs into his ex at like the 7-Eleven or whatever, and they have that little chat. If that happened to me, that would devastate me. To like run into my girlfriend, and she looks so great, and she's smiling and kind of flirting and everything like that, and then she just leaves on the back of a motorcycle of some guy. I'd probably immediately go jump off a bridge if that happened to me. I do not think I could handle that.
He plays it off pretty well, though. I would say, like, he's like, "Hey, you left a bunch of your shit in my place. Come and get it."
Yeah. And again, the way she's acting, because she just leaves. It's like, "You didn't pay." She's like, "You'll pay for me." She's like, "I know that you'll pay for me." Yeah. Oh God. And I know that I would too. But speaking of that, wait, there was another thing. Oh yeah, and here's another weird reaction from that. So obviously he plays it off, but he is upset, seeing her. But his reaction is to take the note that Faye gave him and throw that away. Now he comes back for it, and that's why it gets all wet, right? It's raining. He like tosses it in like a garbage can in the alley or something. I don't know if that's how my reaction would be. I'm not sure. I understand he's feeling a lot of things, you know. He's maybe starting to feel something for Faye, but now he's had his old girlfriend just shoved in his face again. And I mean, nothing's happening there, but, you know, seeing her is going to stir things up. And like I said, to me, it's pretty devastating. And then his reaction is just to take it and throw it because maybe he's thinking, I'll never get over her. So why should I try anything with Faye? I guess is maybe. But he does come back after about a time and retrieve it. It's the boarding pass, right?
Right.
But this is 1994, and again, I'm no expert on Chinese or Hong Kong cinema, though I'm trying to get more educated into it and the directors and things like that. But I think even in 1994, to have a movie with two main male characters, and it's really all about exploring their emotional side and their vulnerabilities. I think that wasn't done a lot, you know. Even when you had some of the romantic movies that preceded them, they were more on the female side, I think, of exploring the females, you know, their perspective and their feelings. You know, that's how, you know, I've seen some of the more sort of standard romances that came out of Hong Kong cinema in the 80s, and they were more female focused. This I thought was interesting because it's focused on the male characters, and it really does show their frailties, their vulnerabilities, and I don't know. I think that's it's almost a risk for somebody like Tony Leung to take, in a way. I mean, I love those scenes. Again, this is where I relate to him, where he's sort of wandering around the apartment. He's talking about the loss of his girlfriend and how it affects everything in the apartment. And he talks about, and he's talking to like random, well, not random, but he's talking to various objects in the apartment. You know, I'm this close to that in some of those scenarios. And after,
oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I feel like a lot of those scenes were improv too. We're just,
I think so too,
messing around. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, both characters.
At one point, he tries to feed the dog pineapple. Come on, try some.
Yeah. Both characters use metaphors a lot in sort of a way that I think maybe Western audiences might think it's a little too on the nose, but I didn't mind it. I kind of liked it. Even I'll say every main character, by the way, gets a voiceover. Even Bridget Lin, although hers are less. But all four of the characters have voiceovers. It jumps around between them, so you get inner thoughts and monologue from each of them in perspective. Bridget Lin obviously has the least, and hers are the least romantic. But she says something. I think this is when she's like woken up on the bed. She says something like, getting to know a person doesn't really even mean that much. And she's like, people change, which is probably the most cynical angle in the movie. But it gets you right here. So, yeah, going back to the first scenario again, it's a bit different in that her character is in real trouble. She is connected to the Hong Kong underworld in some way. She seems to work out of an electronics store that has like some sort of like black market, I don't know, counterfeiting shit going on. And there might be something with drugs. The movie is deliberately vague on what her position is and how she got set up.
Right.
But clearly she gets set up. They think a deal went bad because of her, and guys come after her. And eventually you find out it was that white guy you saw in the bar sometimes. He was like the mastermind of it. And she comes back and, spoilers, caps him. But pretty ruthless. He's like playing with some kittens in the alley, and she blows him away. But
in the beginning, it's like they're fitting people for shoes and clothes and stuff, because I think that's the front. It's like a
like
knockoff. Whatever you would call that type of store, that. But I think they're making the shoes and stuff for the drugs to go in.
Okay, so yeah,
so they're gonna smuggle that, and then at one point I think the guy sticks a condom full of heroin or cocaine, whatever it is.
Yeah, that's the only way I knew that there was drugs when they show the condom with the stuff. I was like, okay, so drugs are in this too.
It's like there was drugs in everything. Like every article of clothing had drugs sewn into it.
Oh, I don't think I picked up on that. But yeah, so pretty serious business. Yeah, but it's not really made clear like what happened or why she's blamed for it. At least as far as I can tell, it seemed to keep that kind of vague. And you got to give the guys that come after her credit too, because she's got like a revolver with 6 shots, and they have the pretty ballsy she can't shoot all of us approach, which not too many people in real life situations would have. Most people have a fight or flight. Somebody has a handgun going into a crowd. Yeah, the crowd could take him down, but most people are like, "Fuck, I don't want to get shot," and you run. But these guys are like, "Okay, she shoots 2 of them, and the rest are like, go get her." So they're pretty ruthless. She does get away.
She's on to him too. She knows they're there. Like as soon as the one guy pops out, she shoots him, and another guy.
No hesitation. Yeah, she knows. Yeah, she's a pretty good survivor. And but she does get interrupted, right? Because we see her making reservations for a flight to get out of town, and they interrupt it, and she can't make the flight, which is, I guess, why she winds up at the bar late at night and runs into Wuxi.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong here. I mean, I know she's having some drinks, but do you think she's on drugs? Because when they go back to that, I guess a hotel, she passes straight out, and he's just sitting there eating salads and everything, and he's eating like a child.
He can eat a lot.
It reminds me of like Macaulay Culkin in Lost in New York or whatever.
Yeah, getting the room service.
I mean, he is a big kid, I think that, at the end of the day. But I was thinking she had to have been on. Maybe she got a hold of some of those narcotics she was working with, and I mean, she sleeps the whole time, and he takes her shoes off. She doesn't even know.
Yeah, I mean, she does say she's exhausted because he says something like, "Do you want to go jogging?" Because he has this other thing. Another one of his little things, right? Is he says if he's upset, he goes jogging because then all the fluids will come out and he won't have any for tears. Is the thing, right? And we actually do see him do that. He leaves. He gets up at like 5 a.m. in the rain and goes running around to do it.
This is after a night of pineapples, and then to
alcohol, which he barfed up
to settle his stomach of 30 cents of pineapples. He goes and drinks alcohol, which doesn't sound like a good idea.
Yeah, and cut right to him yakking in the bathroom.
Then he eats all that, and then he goes running.
He goes for a run. But I mean, it's true. When you're in your 20s, you can put yourself through stuff like that and bounce back pretty quick. I mean, I've done at least comparable things. Not a lot. Even when I drank, I was never much of a hard drinker. It was just every once in a while type thing. But I certainly put myself through things of not eating right and not sleeping and trying to push myself like he did, like not exercising for a long time and then doing some really intense exercise when you're in no way warmed up for it.
Right.
I can feel bad, like how out of shape I am recently, because like recently when I'm going out just walking, because I've been thinking about running again. I haven't run in a few weeks. And I was like, there's no way I'll run, because the last few days I go out, this is an exaggeration, of course, but my calves were hurting and they felt like the back of a claw hammer was being dragged through my calf. I was like, fuck, how am I ever going to run again if this is what walking is doing to me? So I don't know. Falling apart. Because I don't remember feeling like that when I was 25.
Right.
Even though I was
could do whatever,
Even though I was technically a less healthy person when I was 25 than I am now. Because then I was still like underweight and things.
But so I guess we can go to she agrees to go she wants somewhere to lay down, right? So they wind up in the hotel.
So his conversation with her is very one-sided. She basically tells him to buzz off, and he just keeps talking. And it's interesting because it's like, because there's two different sorts of love, I think, in the movie. Because I don't think he really falls in love with her. I think it's more like she helped him sort of get through a difficult period. I don't think he stayed stuck on her. In fact, he seemed to be so happy when she had that one gesture of kindness, and that when he was checking his messages, she had left a message for him telling happy birthday. Because that's what I see. I feel like the second one is a legitimate falling in love and going into a new relationship, and we kind of get confirmation of that. Whereas it seems to me like this guy had a chance meeting that sort of helped him get through a time when he was feeling really bad. And the sort of the irony is he never knew her situation, what trouble she was in. I mean, he's a cop, and he had no idea. And that's something, if you go back to the very opening, once you get into the shot of him, chasing the suspect that gets away, I'm thinking, man, a guy with a bag on his head got away from you. That doesn't look too good.
Yeah.
The guy has a bag on his head. He still managed to elude you. And of course, it's in those really crowded places. And I wasn't really happy with the stylistic choice there. It's not in the second half of the movie, but in the first where they do that weird, I don't know, they cut the frame rate or something to make it kind of blurry and everything.
Yeah, it's very jarring to me.
Yeah,
I mean,
they
it
do
gets the
that.
point across. Yeah.
Yeah, they do that in the opening they do it for both
Mhm.
chases, when he's chasing the guy and the suspect gets away, and later when she's being chased by the drug guys or whatever. And I get what it's trying to convey. I just don't think it's really necessary because I mean I get it. They're saying frenetic
Right.
action, being confused, being don't know what's going to be down this corner and people everywhere. And I just don't know if you really need that. It doesn't bother me too much, but I don't know. I feel like you could probably take it out and shoot it regular, because it's interesting how the two movies are the two sections are shot too, because the first section, even when it's not making that weird camera effect, everything is very claustrophobic. Most of it seems to be handheld camera, or has to be, because it's very intimate.
Right.
When they're showing the drug and the smuggling operation, it's a very confined space with a lot of people in it, and the camera's on them and moving around. And then the second part of the movie doesn't really have any of that. It's more shot more conventionally. So it's not just a story change and a tone change. It's even a style change once you get into the second story, which is interesting. I like it. It doesn't bother me. I mean, obviously it's on purpose. So it's not like I would say the movie is inconsistent or uneven. I think it's trying to make a genuine separation, right, between the two stories.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I've never been a fan of that effect. I think it's they make the frame rate lower or something to make it sort of choppy. I get what they're going for. I just don't think it's necessary. It's
I
just sort of a
agree.
chase scene.
I agree. I
Because
mean,
the
it's a
thing,
stylistic choice, but
although in the case of her chase scene, you did give me something to think about. Because I was going to say earlier, before you said what you said about her passing out, I was like, it's not like she's on drugs, but maybe she is on drugs. In which case, maybe that is more merited. Because maybe it is more confusing and boring together because she is on something. But in his case, he's not on anything. He's a cop chasing down a suspect. He does redeem himself a little later. We do see him arrest somebody, which is more police work that we see Tony Lung do. Tony Lung doesn't do anything. It's also interesting that he's only just turned 25 and he's a plainclothes officer. And Tony Lung's got a few years older than him, and he's still a uniform.
that's a good point.
I mean, there are older guys. There's really old guys that are still uniforms. But I'm just saying, it is interesting choice to decide to make the first guy, Takashi, plainclothes, because that's pretty
It's
young for plainclothes.
it's almost like he got demoted or something, because at one point when she runs into him again, probably on purpose, but
Yeah.
she's like, "Oh, you haven't seen you around." He's like, "Yeah, I'm on a different beat now," or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever terminology he uses.
Yeah.
I'm
And
not
she makes
really
the effort
familiar
to
with
start.
how that works.
And she starts making the effort to come around there, because she runs into him by chance the first time. She's on some errand, but then she makes it seem like she's always coming around that way anyway, just because she wants to see him. It's one of the
Right.
more organic romances I've ever seen in a movie, because they don't exactly flirt. They're pleasant with each other. It's interesting. It does seem kind of realistic in a way, because it doesn't fall into any of those stupid cliches you see in so many romantic movies. It's not like, oh, she hated him or he couldn't stand her, because that's the biggest one, right? Like two
Right.
people, they meet and they really get on each other's nerves and grr, and then over time they see their vulnerable sides and they fall in love, blah blah, done to death. There's none of that, but there's also none of like the sort of coy flirting either. Really, they just seem to converse civilly, but they don't say too much. She knows a bit about his personal life because he's been talking about it with the owner. She knows
Right.
when his girlfriend has left him, because unlike the first story where the breakup has already happened, this the second story, the breakup happens after the start. Because the first time he comes in, he's picking up food. He's still living with the girlfriend. He's talking about food to take back to her. And then a week later, he comes back and the relationship has ended.
Mm-hmm. Well, Faye definitely seems into him in the beginning, more so than he does into her.
Yeah, and she's by far so proactive that it becomes kind
Right.
of, I wouldn't say creepy or anything. That's a movie, but so
Well,
for the
she
audience's
does.
sake,
She does break into his apartment, or not break in, but goes into his apartment
let
uninvited. Yeah, and
yeah,
does a lot
she
of weird
cleans
shit.
She cleans things up, but then she just starts to redecorate to see if he'll notice. And there's even that bit where like she's on his bed with a magnifying glass, I guess, looking for traits to see things about his sex life, and she finds one of the ex's hairs. But she actually seems amused by this, so instead of upset. So I don't really know what. Again, she's kind of weird.
Yeah, I think weird says it all. But doesn't she kind of embody? I know this is a few years after the '90s, but she kind of embodies that '90s girl to me. Like, I mean, her look, her dress, the quirkiness.
Like I
She
said, well,
reminds me of
the manic
like a
pixie dream girl is something that really came into its own in the '90s. You can find older versions of it, but the '90s is when it really became a thing. So I think that's absolutely true.
because this is the type of girl I was into at the time. So
Oh yeah, I've had on off
exactly,
things with that trope. Asian one would be nice. While I think about my various fetishes, but wacky mannerisms, idealistic, free spirited, and
exactly.
it. But it's not just window dressing for her character because it explains her actions towards the end. Because it's like she seems so into him, and now he's finally going to reciprocate and ask her for a date, and she doesn't show up, and then she disappears for a year. You could always, I mean, I guess you could think that's kind of a bitch move, but I get it because all that stuff's not for show. She really did want to go to California. She wanted to get out and see the world and try something. And I know what she was thinking. She was thinking, and that's probably was put in the letter and it got washed away. There's the boarding pass. I think she was probably like, I was stuck on this guy, but the truth is I didn't know him. So would it really be worth it to delay my plans or even cancel my plans for this guy? I think that's what it was. It was like, no, I have to go. I have to see this through. Like, I feel bad about leaving him, but we're not together. We're not boyfriend, girlfriend, or anything like that. I'm not like leaving him standing at the altar. So I don't have any malice towards her for her action. I don't think what she did was so bad. I feel like she felt like this was something she had to do, and if she started to get involved with him, she wouldn't do it, and she felt like she had to do this on her own first.
Was there a final straw where she like made that decision? I didn't. I don't remember seeing it. If so,
No, we don't see her make that revelation, and there's no narration, which is interesting. There's no narration where she says something like, where she explains any of that, like, I'm falling for this guy, or something like, I have to
right.
get out of here. The whole yearning to get out of there is just the damn song over and over again, really. She's literally dreaming of California. We get it. Because, I mean, she tries to talk to him, because at one point, like, a little hint there is when she's asking about stuff. At one point, she says, well, do you like music? He's like, I don't care either way. And then she goes, what about travel? He's like, I don't care either way. So that's the other, if you want to talk about a big cliche for the manic pixie dream girl is she runs up against a guy like him, like a straightforward, kind of boring,
Right.
no imagination,
Yeah.
by the book guy, and she charms him. So it's not like the movie is completely free of cliches, but I will say for a 1994 Hong Kong movie, it's pretty much new ground.
You know, it is kind of on the nose as far as like a rom com would go. You got this straight laced guy and the quirky girl. I mean, I can think of 10 movies right now that are like that. And opposites attract.
Yeah, as I said, that's a very old trope. Even like
Yeah.
the manic pixie dream girl thing can go back centuries, really. But I think it really became sort of a really popular thing in the '90s. So yeah, she's one of the better examples of it.
At one point she does drug him. So yeah, I think yeah, she's a little more out there than we think, I believe.
I suppose.
And what's the purpose of her changing the brand of tuna fish or whatever kind of fish, canned fish, sardines?
Again, I think she was just some of it. She just wanted to see how long it would take him to notice anything.
Ah, okay.
I
And he
think
doesn't, right? He doesn't ever notice anything.
it takes him super long to notice, and then it's like when he notices, he just doesn't care. He just rolls with it. Like he's not even like, "Who's been into my apartment?" He's just like, you know. Which is funny because at first he does seem angry. He's like, "What are you doing in my apartment?" And she never explains herself. And I guess it is interesting the stuff that doesn't get said in the movie. It's like he obviously puts it together himself. Oh, she's been letting herself in here and screwing around with stuff, and then she accidentally flooded the place.
Right.
He has another one of his poetic lines, talking about the apartment crying. But yeah, it's interesting because early, again, going back to him talking to inanimate objects, one of the things he talks to like this old like dish towel he has. It's all ragged. She replaces it and gives him a new one, and he's still and he's like, "Well, you're looking better." It's like, but and the same thing with the soap. He had a soap that was used; it was all worn down. He's like, "You've lost weight. You look terrible." And then later, she replaces it with a big new soap, and he's like, But it's like he's not stupid. He knows they're different, but he just doesn't seem to have any real reaction to it. He just sort of goes with it. It's really quite odd, but I kind of like it.
It's like someone that lives with their mother type vibes. Like it just gets done. It happens. You're not a part of that process, but it gets done.
Yeah.
And like he calls the soap fat at one point. You see, you were really plump or something.
Yeah, and now you've lost weight. Yeah, that's what he's saying. But then she replaces it with a new plump new soap.
Do you think that she grew her hair out for him when she was gone for that year?
I don't know. He never seemed to say anything about her hair being short.
That's
which
true,
you almost might think a straight-laced guy like him might say, like, that's short hair for a woman or something, but he doesn't.
She did seem to really enjoy the long hair on the ex, though.
It does seem to me that sometimes things like that don't even have much to do with the character. It's more just a device. It's to show the time has passed. Because, it's a year later, so she let her hair grow a bit. Sometimes that's what they do in movies. Like, we already know it's a year later because you told us, but here we'll give you something that sort of shows it. So she's grown her hair. So I hadn't considered it as something like a character decision, but I suppose it's possible. Because you're right. She seems to, now that you say that, you're right. Maybe she was reacting to just how long the hair was. And she was thinking, oh, his ex had really long hair. That's what he likes. That's a good point. That's not something I'd considered until you mentioned that. So I guess it at least does both, because certainly it's something they do in movies too to show the passage of time. They did in freaking Avengers Endgame, right? They had the 5-year gap, and then you come back and it's like, look, Black Widow's got different hair.
Usually someone has a beard or something,
Yeah. Well, that's what they did with Cap, but that was before that, because that was between Infinity War and that, right? Because Cap is not to really get everything to Marvel, but at this point, Cap is a criminal on the run, so he's grown the beard. But the beard is usually, again, getting back to tropes, there's the beard of sorrow, right? If you have some guy and something sad has happened to him and he's let himself go, he's grown a beard.
And then usually it gets shaved off soon after.
Yeah, to show that he's like
maybe
back,
a montage.
Yeah, and he'll shave it off to show that he's back. He's getting back in the swing of things. But yeah, the beard of sorrow.
Another thing that kind of pisses me off about this movie is she keeps buying fish, right?
Yeah.
The fish she chooses to buy are Oscars. They're a South American cichlid that get huge.
Oh.
They get 5 pounds,
So he won't be able to take care of them.
No. And people do that, and what happens is they get a disease called hole in the head disease when their tank is too small.
Oh.
Which is also caused by too much, waste in the water usually.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, she's got. I'm watching it now. She's got like 6 of them, and then there's another time when she gives him like another 5 more.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, I don't know, little pet peeve of mine having fish all my life.
Yeah, I wouldn't know that. I just figured they just picked a fish that looked visually.
They probably did
memorable.
Yeah.
But yeah, you do wonder about the. By the way, the first Sammo Hung, it just popped into my head. Like horror comedy. I was thinking it was 1980. Was The Dead and the Deadly, where he's basically, I think he's like some sort of like monk, and people dare him to stay in a haunted place over the night, and then he gets attacked by a bunch of like spirits and demons and stuff, and hilarity ensues. I think he directed that too. But anyway, there's no martial arts silliness in this movie.
Unfortunately.
Bridget Linton's character is the most mysterious by far. She has the least screen time. We never even really see her with the sunglasses off. She's wearing, throughout the whole thing, she's wearing a wig, trench coat, and sunglasses, which is like standard for being disguised. It's like the best way to not let people know what you look at, like without being like really obvious about it. So she spends all her time, and in one of her narrations, it's interesting because she mentions it as like a raincoat. She says, "I'm becoming more cautious." She's like, "It hasn't rained, but I'm wearing a raincoat just in case or something," which again is probably a metaphor, really more about just being cautious because she knows people are after her or could be after her. But she's definitely the most mysterious character, has the least screen time, talks the least, and her interaction with him is so one-sided. I mean, she mostly just brushes him off, says a few things to him to try to discourage him, gives in and goes, and then just sleeps. And to his credit, he's fine with it. He seems all right. You know, he lets her sleep.
Yeah.
And actually, unlike, this is the reverse of a lot of cliches, is, you know, she's the mysterious woman that he's drawn to, and they stay the night together, although in this case they don't sleep together, like that. He actually leaves when she's still asleep. It's not the, you know, I woke up and she was gone, which happens a lot in these types of things, right?
Right.
So that makes it a bit different. It is that he leaves her. I mean, presumably he does have to go to his job at some point, and he's barely slept. But it is kind of a different wrinkle, is that he actually leaves her instead of that. I mean, she does get out of there soon after, and she has to, I don't know, she try to get on another plane. I'm not sure. It's not resolved.
You know, I don't think he needs to sleep because he carbo loads for so long that he's ready to go. He said he ate 2 chef salads. Yeah, he did, but he also ate like hamburgers and a big plate of fries and who knows what else.
Yeah.
Which is
funny. I guess because the diner the movie centers around specializes in Western food. So the movie's full of like scenes of people eating Western stuff.
Yeah, I saw it says like kebabs and pizzeria and which is an odd combination, but you know, hey.
Because when 663 is it? When he's there, when he still has the girlfriend, he's ordering stuff. He said the guy's like, try something different, try fish and chips. He's like, well, I don't know if she'll like it. And then later he's like, well, we got pizza. He's like, I don't know if she'll like that either. Because so it shows that she's living sort of a different life because she's not eating that stuff, even though she's a stewardess and travels. To say. And I guess that's another thing, is in the end, Faye becomes a stewardess too. You know, he'd been dumped by one stewardess and got together with somebody who eventually became another one. And she does look so different wearing the uniform and having the longer hair. Mm-hmm. It's like, did she transform for him? I don't know.
And that's kind of like her intrigue with him is, I mean, she finds all the airplanes and stuff like that, and I guess she thinks he's really into traveling.
Yeah, but it's really, she just left a bunch of her stuff there.
Right. And I think she even left an outfit there, right? She left one of the flight attendant, whatever the correct terminology is for that, the outfit.
Yeah. But the two stories really contrast with each other, which obviously is on purpose, and that one is dark and mysterious and has some danger to it, and then the second one is sort of quirky and sunny. You know, one is mostly like almost all night scenes, and the second one is almost all daytime scenes. Mm-hmm. Which was really where the concept of the movie came from. Let's see. Originally, Wong envisioned the stories as similar but with contrasting settings, one in Hong Kong in daylight and the other in Kowloon at night. He felt that despite the difference, they are the same stories. One was about encountering love in the tight city, the other is about keeping love without physical connection, which I guess means like sort of a long distance type relationship. It's not exactly how the movie played out, but it's, I guess, where the idea started, I suppose. But I mean, if you want to get really philosophical about it, again, you could say like the other character in this movie is Hong Kong, because I mean, it's really about Hong Kong life and sort of the way people crash into each other there, because it's I think to this day, it's the most densely populated place on Earth.
Really?
Mm-hmm. It's not a big area, and yet there's just people upon people upon people. And Kowloon would have been a great example of that. But yeah, a lot of these Asian cities, some of them by necessity, like Hong Kong, being an island, right? So there's only so much room for it. Look, I remember talking to the girl I knew from Thailand. She lived in Bangkok. And Bangkok, of course, It's got a pretty big population. It's not a massive city. It's a big city. It's certainly bigger than Halifax, where I live. But Halifax is much bigger physically. Halifax is much more spread out. It's a much bigger area. Bangkok is a pretty small area. They're all underwater right now, by the way. They had another big flood.
They have a typhoon over there?
Yeah, I think they caught part of it. Because they always get heavy rains anyway, but at least like parts, I've seen footage and stuff, parts of Bangkok, the water's like up to like the windows on cars. I mean, that's a pretty normal thing. That happens a lot, but still. Can't imagine just life being interrupted that way, like every few weeks or a couple of months. The place just floods and everybody just goes with it. And for the most part,
living in Haiti or somewhere, it's like, oh, it's coming again. Grab your shit.
I know. I talked about this last time because I was talking about Fiona, what we just been through, and I was just saying, like, you know, at least it doesn't. I mean, they are, because of climate change and things. These are picking up, but yeah, like you said, like living in a place like Haiti and places like the Caribbean, it's just like it's just known that you're gonna get whomped multiple times a year. It's like it's a tropical paradise, except when like the sky goes insane and tries to kill everybody. You know, I see it. Like, I don't know if the trade-off I'd really be that happy with. I guess
angered the sun god yet again.
I mean, I guess if I was ever going to move to a Caribbean city, I probably would be wealthy anyway. I'd hope I'd be wealthy enough to tell them to build like as hurricane-proof a place as they could. Like, I mean,
it's just you're wealthy enough to get the fuck out of there before it hits.
Yeah,
you know,
that's the other thing too. I mean, whenever people talk about like hurricanes hitting, like bad hurricanes, and people are like, "Why don't they evacuate?" It's like, well, think of the logistics of it and how much it would cost a lot of people, and a lot of people don't have anywhere to go. So, yeah, it sucks. But it's not in this movie, but it did. But the just talking about the flooding and talking about you know, the poor places like Kowloon. It reminds you of the Korean movie Parasite, right? When their poor neighborhood gets totally flooded, especially the basement apartments. Like, that's not made up. That's true. Places like that, it does happen.
I need to watch that again. I've only seen it the one time. I bought it though. I just haven't watched it since I bought it.
Yeah, I gotta buy it. Park Chan-wook.
Yep. Have we done any of his on here? Surely we have. No, we didn't.
I believe.
No. Mother.
There's two. Yeah, there's two we get mixed up. Let's get this straight, just so that I stop mixing up my Korean directors. Park Chan-wook.
So surely we've done one of his by now.
It's the director who did the Vengeance trilogy. So we did Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance.
Okay.
So that's Park Chan-wook. So it's the other guy whose name I'm now blanking on. Right.
Yeah, Thirst. We should do Thirst at some point.
Because way back, one of the very first movies we did on this show was Mother.
Mm-hmm.
And that's by the other director whose name is escaping me and driving me crazy. 2009.
We've talked about doing Stoker multiple times.
Bong Joon-ho. So yes. So as I keep getting things mixed up, Bong Joon-ho is the director of Parasite. And the director of Mother and Snow.
Oh shit! Yeah, you're right. I know.
Right. So we've done one of each for them, because we did Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance by Park Chan-wook, and we've done Mother by Bong Joon-ho. So we've done one for each of them. But yeah, I often get them mixed up.
We have lots of other Korean films that we'd like to do, but it's just hard for us to get our streaming services to line up the different countries. Yeah. So
I'm sure there's a couple I could probably find online. I know there's a couple you mentioned that I could do.
That's really put a damper. That's put a damper on a lot of our stuff we've wanted to do, like, because you'll have it and I won't, and then vice versa.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, Bong Joon-ho. So, but we've done at least one by each of them, which is good. But yeah, as we said, it's kind of crazy that only now we're getting around to Kar-Wai, who is such a significant director. Period. To say nothing of just as the Hong Kong. And Days of Being Wild has both Tony Leung and Andy Lau. I've never seen it, but that's kind of it's his second movie, but it's kind of the movie that he has, and also has Maggie Chung in it. Man, it's easy to forget, like if you just watch like a bunch of Jackie Chan movies, that Maggie Chung isn't just like a girl that they stick in action movies to look pretty. Like she's actually a very talented actress that has done some really good dramatic roles over the years. But depending upon how many Chinese or Hong Kong movies you've seen, you might just think that, oh, she's the girl that shows up in a lot of those things. Like, I mean, when you're thinking of a lot of those people, a lot of them straddle both. For instance, like, of course, Michelle Yeoh. Michelle Yeoh is very much both. In fact, unlike Maggie Chung, she actually has some martial arts to her. Well, it was interesting. She was never a formally trained martial artist, but she was a ballerina. So when she started learning martial arts on the fly for her movies, she took to them very well. But then you've also got somebody like Sybil Wu, is it? Or no, getting my names mixed up. Sybil Wu? I want to say Sybil Wu. And of course, somebody like, okay, Moon Lee. Moon Lee is not to take anything away from Moon Lee, but Moon Lee is not like an actress with a bunch of great dramatic roles. She is sort of the action girl thing. Not saying she can't act or anything, but I'm just saying sometimes you can think of a lot of these Asian actresses and they show up in a lot of these like martial arts movies, and you might think like that's all they do, but a lot of them, and somebody like Maggie Chung, they have very storied careers. Sybil who? Man, okay, now I have to get this down. I don't like getting my names wrong. Sybil Hu, yeah. I was saying Wu at first. Sybil Hu, H-U. Artists of that generation, they're all be in their late 50s, early 60s now, having been in a lot of Hong Kong movies, including action movies in the 80s and 90s. But anyway, the point was Maggie Chung is a really good actress with a lot of really good things, and a couple with Tony Leung. Because there's Hero, which is a wuxia movie, but still a wuxia movie with very sort of dramatic type performances. And then, of course, there's the aforementioned In the Mood for Love by this director, Gong War-hai. But yeah, whenever I feel bad about getting Bong Joon-ho's name mixed up, it's just like every time I think of a Korean director, I always go to Park Chan-wook first.
I think we do that every time we talk about either one of those guys. Too.
Yeah, we mix them up. So that's why I want to just get it in front of me and make the separation for sure. Park Chan-wook,
you were like,
Vengeance
Park
Trilogy.
Chan.
Yeah,
you were like, that's Park Chan-wook, right? I'm like, yeah, that's sure.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah. Brigitte Lin, of course, would be part of those too. She's in a lot of those action movies. Brigitte Lin is by far the oldest.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, that was kind of the point, even in the movie, is that she was sort of there was an age gap between her and him. She even asked him, like, "How old are you anyway?" He's like, "I'm just turned 25," and she's like, "Yeah, I don't like you."
Well, didn't she come out of retirement? Didn't she come out of retirement just to work with him, like just to make this movie?
It's possible. I don't know. She'd been in The Bride with the White Hair, which was just like the year before.
Well, I read that somewhere. It may or may not be true.
Yeah. First movie I saw her in was Swordsman 2 with Jet Li, which is 1990. So she's in a lot of, when you're looking at some of these wuxia, she's in a lot of those more fantasy ones too. Zoo Warriors from Magic Mountain. Swordsman 2. Swordsman 3, The Bride with White Hair, Bride with Hair 2. She's in quite a few. Actually, the thing is, maybe it was she postponed her retirement because after 90, she made several movies in 94 and then she stopped. She was in one movie in '98, but just yeah, I mean, basically she retired after this because in the movie in '98 she was a narrator, in the movie in 2001 she was a narrator, and then she played herself on some reality show. So basically, maybe this is the last movie she made before she retired. Maybe she postponed retirement for it, is what it is. Because here I'm looking at it, she stops in '94 or after '94. So that's what it was, that she postponed her retirement. It's interesting. Michelle Yeoh, of course, having in the second half of the '80s done quite a few movies, mostly action stuff, not really done serious acting yet. Then she briefly retired. She got married and retired basically because she thought, she was just going to do sort of like a maybe start a family thing. And she came out of retirement to do Super Cop. And then from there started doing more dramatic roles and not just action stuff. And, she's never let up. And now she's a fucking legend, Michelle Yeoh. But she was retired for about 2 or 3 years. Super Cop was her first movie in a while. She was a bit rusty, she said. But of course, speaking of mixing people up, famously, although I did correct myself later on, when we did our live commentary on Police Story, they show the secretary for the gang first, and that's Bridget Lin. And I was like, there's Maggie Cheung. I was like, wow, Maggie Cheung looks a bit older. But of course it wasn't Maggie Cheung, that's Bridget Lin. Maggie Cheung was May, Jackie's girlfriend. But I did correct myself eventually. But at first I was confused. I'm like, that can't be Maggie Cheung, can it? Because yeah, again, a bit of an age gap there, and obviously they look different. So yeah. But anyway, all these actresses at some point have worked with Wong Kar-Wai. Well, I had a quote, speaking of Chungking Express, because since that is what we are speaking of. The Roger Ebert quote is weird because it seems like I agree with it, but I don't agree with like what's behind it. Like, I need to read it. This is just on Wikipedia here. Film critic Roger Ebert was measured in praise, giving the film 3 out of 4 stars. See, this is what I disagree with him about. This is the kind of movie you'll relate to if you love film itself, rather than its surface aspects such as story and stars. It's not a movie for casual audiences, and it may not reveal all its secrets the first time through. Like, I agree with that second statement. If you are attentive to the style, if you think of what Wong is doing, Chungking Express works. If you're trying to follow the plot, you may feel frustrated. When Godard was hot in the 60s and early 70s, there was an audience for his style. But in those days, there were still film societies and repertory theaters to build and nourish such audiences. Many of today's younger filmgoers, and this is in 1994, he's saying, fed only by the narrow selections of video stores, are not as curious or knowledgeable, and may simply be puzzled by Chungking Express instead of challenged. It needs to be said, in any event, that a film like this largely is a cerebral experience. You enjoy it because of what you know about film, not because of what it knows about life. So it's weird, like, he goes back and forth between saying things I agree with and disagree with.
I wouldn't agree with that at all. I was always seeking out new stuff, regardless of what I had access to. That was.
Oh no, he's just talking about like the more, sort of casual film goer. I don't have any problem with that. I'm disagreeing with what he's saying about the film in general. Because he's saying, like, you'll like it if you like film and you're interested in the style that the director's doing. But as far as the story and character and performances go, not so much. Where I feel like the story and characters and performances are good. It's not straightforward, like, like your typical romance or romantic comedy. But I do like that. And I've spent a lot of already tonight saying what I like about the movie is the performances and the characters and the way I relate to them and how I find them interesting. So that's what I disagree with him. I do agree that he's saying that it is true about how, like, again, by these days, he means 1994, there are younger people that really only know kind of sort of the more mainstream stuff. That applies now, too, even though at least now it's a lot easier to see foreign films and underground films and independent films and things like that. We live definitely at the best time as far as this goes.
Well, he almost downplays the importance of story, actors, and performances.
Well, that's what he's saying. He's saying, like, none of that is really good. But what you'll like about it is if you're a fan of film, it seems like you'll enjoy its style. But
did he give it a thumbs up?
3 out of 4 stars, so I guess that's a thumbs up. But he says at the end, he says, you enjoy it because what you know about film, not because of what it knows about life. Like, I don't disagree with that. I don't agree with that. I'm not saying, there's no film out there that perfectly nails everything about life. Some films get some things right, some get some things wrong, and some are in the middle. I don't know. Life is a big thing, and it's a different experience for fucking every
Well,
single person. So to say the film gets a bunch of stuff wrong about life, I don't agree with.
well, a
I
lot
feel
of
like
that
there's plenty of
is
stuff in the movie that's true to life.
a lot of that's subjective too. Like how you relate to it is kind of a personal experience.
Yeah. And as I said,
So
there's things in this I do relate to. For as many things as I don't relate to, there are things I do relate to too. Rolling Stone's Peter Travers praised the film as both exasperating and exhilarating. There's no mistaking Wong's talent. His hypnotic images of love and loss finally wear down your resistance as seemingly discordant sights and sounds coalesce into a radiant crazy quilt that can make you laugh and awe at its technical wizardry in one scene and pierce your heart in the next. So yeah, I agree that. I don't find any of it really frustrating, though. I'm not sure where the frustrating stuff comes in. I don't find it frustrating. You could maybe be frustrated that the first story is not really resolved,
right.
but I didn't mind that. I didn't really have a problem with it because, as I said, again, this is subjective. My own understanding of it was like the second love was like they fall in love and they're gonna have it. I always felt like his love with Bridget Lynn. I mean, at no point did she show any love for him, so how could you call it love? It was more like that chance encounter got him through a rough time and sort of made him believe in love again. He's had his heart broken. He was so sure May was going to come back. May's not coming back. And he said, I made up my mind to fall in love with the next woman I saw. So he just happens to fall in love with a very strange woman in a very crazy situation that he doesn't know anything about. And she basically rebuffs him. But in the end, she's somewhat kind to him because she does go with him. And then she does leave him the message, happy birthday, which really means a lot, not just because of his birthday, because she doesn't even know that he's been obsessively checking his messages a whole month, right? That's one of the subplots, as he keeps calling the service, because, again, you don't have cell phones or anything like that, to check his messages, hoping that May has called, and she hasn't. So it meant the world to him to get a message from somebody. So I actually am really a fan of how one story does not exactly end, it just bleeds into the other. And I don't know, the Midnight Express place is a good enough place to sort of center the action. And we've seen films before that tell differing stories, but sometimes the characters cross paths. As I said, you get that little bit where Bridget Lynn, who's never going to interact with Faye, they do actually cross paths, and it's just a little bit foreshadowing that Faye is going to show up later.
I'd be willing to bet there's probably some of that we missed too. They're probably in the background of some of the shots that.
Yeah, I mean, it's pointed out for us at the opening, because in the opening, I mean, they basically stop the show. When he's chasing the criminal that gets away, it stops and it freezes and it shows she's there in the background. He says, and he says in 50 some hours, whatever, I'm going to fall in love with her. So it shows that they cross paths too before he actually officially meets her, which again plays to the whole thing of the sort of the claustrophobic world they're living in. It's really overpopulated and crowded and people all on top of each other. And yeah, I feel like the movie is very sort of a slice of life movie, despite the fact that the opening or the first story does have some crime drama elements to it, an actual chase scene, she actually kills some guys and things like that. It's interesting how ruthless she is too, because I mean, she kills the guys after, but she finds out that the white guy, I guess, is the root of it. She goes and mercilessly executes him.
Did it say how she found that out?
It was something like, again, speaking of, there was a part where she talks to some guy that obviously some sort of contact, right? I can't remember what sort of store he runs. And remember, she just brazenly walks out with his daughter. Remember that? Yeah. She just lifts up his daughter and takes off, and said that, so he gets the information from him. He knows somehow, because she says, if you don't tell me in the next hour what I want to know, you'll never see your daughter again. And probably it's a bluff. I don't think she would actually do anything to the daughter. But again, her character is very mysterious and ruthless, and we don't see much of her, so how do we know? The daughter certainly never feels. It was a different place. It was a different place.
Okay, it was a different place. Okay.
It wasn't Midnight Express. But yeah, so that guy had some sort of lead on it, like he knew. Although, again, they kept all that stuff kind of vague because I guess it was less important. But yeah, but he does call and tell her the name that she wants to know. But at least it makes sense, because earlier in the movie, that white guy has a scene, and you have no idea why. Like, we don't know why he's gonna, like, eventually we find out that he is important. We just have this scene of a white guy speaking English to this girl at the bar who also has a blonde wig, and like he like makes out with her for a while and tells her some stuff, and then it leaves. Then it comes back to him doing the same thing, and Bridget Lynn shows up and kills him in the alleyway. But the first scene that has him, you have no idea why you're seeing him or what relevance he has to anything. It's kind of funny. But yeah, so it's Midnight Express is the diner, but the bar where Chi-Woo, the first cop, meets Bridget Lynn is the Bottoms Up Club, which was a real place. It actually had been in a movie before that. It was in the James Bond film, The Man with the Golden Gun from 1974. I guess it must be that belly dancing scene because I can't think of another one. But yeah, it's definitely a movie that you can, having watched it twice in a quick turnaround, it's definitely a movie that you can benefit from seeing multiple times because there's definitely things you probably wouldn't notice the first time through that you can pick up on again, like some of the foreshadowing and characters actually seeing each other before they officially cross paths or meet or whatever, and some things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so Days of Being Wild was not commercially successful, but it got him noticed by critics. And I need to see it because this movie, in many ways, is sort of an extension of that. He does a lot of the same kind of stuff. It's sort of the same sort of style. This idea of being like having various narrative ellipses, I guess, kind of a melancholy atmosphere and quirky-esque characters. Like all that was done in Days of Being Wild too. And again, it's interesting because we think of somebody like Tony Leung and Andy Lau as huge stars, and it's not like they weren't. I mean, they were pretty well known in like 1990, so it's kind of surprising that that movie didn't do well. Because while those guys hadn't yet reached the level they would, it's not like they were like, young unproven actors that nobody knew. So I'm very interested to see, Days of Being Wild. Check here of movies by Wong Kar-Wai that I've seen. As I said, he's done 10. I think I've seen 4. Let's take a look here. Filmography. So I have seen Chungking Express, In the Mood for Love, The Grandmaster. Okay, so only 3. But I want to see like all the others. They all seem interesting to me.
I think I've only seen 2 of those.
What is Fallen Angels? He did Fallen Angels between Chungking Express and Happy Together. Fallen Angels is it's a straight crime thriller. Okay, that's like a neo-noir crime thriller.
Was that the one that was supposed to be the third part of this movie, but he thought it was too much, so he just made it its own separate thing?
It could be. It has Takashi Kaneshiro again.
As I know, it was originally supposed to be 3 parts, and I'm glad it wasn't because this. I feel like this is a perfect runtime. I feel like any longer and it would have felt too much. Kind of like what Ebert was saying.
The first story is 42 minutes. The second story is an hour. So there's a big difference there in time. The second story is longer, more fleshed out, which makes sense. You wouldn't want the second story. I mean, the way the second story sort of has a kind of an abrupt ending makes sense. So it makes sense that the second story would be longer and more fleshed out. But yeah, what makes Fallen Angels kind of like this is that it's also divided into 2 stories. Although they might actually intersect more than in this movie. I'm not sure. But Fallen Angels is also told as two stories. But it's a straight, as far as like genre or tone goes, it's a crime thriller. Then Happy Together is like a romantic drama. And In the Mood for Love is sort of a romantic drama, also / kind of thriller. That's the one that gets talked about a lot. That gets brought up a lot. I mean, I like it too. I really like the movie. Plus, I mean, it's helped by having two of the biggest stars having some fairly graphic sex scenes.
Doesn't hurt.
So he did eventually get there. But yeah, speaking of Park Chan-wook, and I'm sure I'm right this time, I always think of like his movie The Handmaiden, which has some really explicit sex scenes, particularly between two women. It's a good movie. It's actually a remake of a movie from like 1960.
Was it the same like lesbian content? I mean, I know not as graphic.
Yeah, probably not shown as explicit. I think so. It was also called The Handmaiden. I have to look into it because I have not seen the original. But
it's such a generic title. It's been so many movies with that, and that something similar like that type of a title.
Handmaiden.
Yeah. Or with Handmaiden in the title of
Yeah. It's interesting whenever you're looking at a foreign movie or a Chinese movie because sometimes like the movie has a different title and is in English, and sometimes it doesn't, and the direct translation just sounds kind of weird. Like I look at something like Days of Being Wild. That sounds, I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, but it does sound a little awkward, doesn't it?
It sounds like it's a translation or something.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like a title. It makes sense in English, but it doesn't sound like something you might title something. So you get that awkwardness every once in a while. I always thought it was interesting that Jackie Chan, who made movies that were, straightforward martial arts action type movies, he always, once he started like directing most of his movies, it was important to him to give them really vague titles because he didn't want to give away the plot, which I think is hilarious. You're not writing mysteries, Jackie. This isn't Knives Out. And yet Jackie's like, I just call it Police Story because I don't want people to know what's going on. And Police Story 2 and Project A, things like that. It's vague. It's like, I don't want to give away the plot. Like, the plot is you are kicking people, Jackie. That's the plot. You're hopping around and you're kicking people. And yet it was important to him for a lot of his movies to have deliberately sort of vague titles because he didn't want to give the plot away. Although I understand that on one side, because if you look at a lot of there are certain Chinese movies or English or Western movies that when they get translated into Chinese, they turn into like a whole sentence about the movie. I'm sure you've seen that before, right? For some reason, whenever they because I guess direct translation isn't possible for a lot of titles for whatever reason. So I'm sure you've seen like a lot of Chinese translation, Japanese too sometimes, of like movies that were Western movies with English titles, is they'll have like a really long rambling sort of title that almost sort of does describe things. I can't think of an example, but I know you've heard those things before. Probably the best one is Face Off itself. Face Off is which face is belonging to whom? I kill you again. Harder. That is the Chinese name. And that had a Chinese director. That was John Woo. But that is the Chinese title of Face Off. Whose face is belonging? It's whose face is belonging to whom?
Oh.
I kill you again harder.
Oh, God.
That's the whole thing.
That's an awful title.
But that's what a lot of those titles are. For some reason, I guess they don't translate directly. So instead, they turn into like a weird like description of the movie. So from that side of it, I understand Jackie Chan's reasoning. He's like, I don't want to do that. But you're not doing any translation, Jackie. You're making your own title. So I don't know.
Wow. Whose face belongs to whom? But yeah, this movie, Chungking Express, is also on the 1001 Movies to Watch Before You Die.
Another one we've covered.
Not very shocking, but we've really been hitting the numbers there. I don't look at that book to pick stuff to cover. It just turns out that
a lot of the ones we do. We have good taste. But also on this movie, if you saw the tweet I put out from the poster, this has a Criterion release.
It does. That's where I was able to watch it. It's also streaming on HBO here in America.
I'm not sure what it's on. It's on Crave for me. That's how I saw it, which it might be through HBO because Crave does HBO, or it could be something else. I'm not sure. It's kind of vague how that gets fed into it because Crave for me includes HBO, Stars, and some other stuff. all sort of combined.
But even that being the case, it doesn't line up a lot of the time. Like it'll be on one of ours and not on the other. You know.
Yeah.
But yeah. Oh well. First world problems, I guess.
But Warren Kar-Wai's last film was The Grand Master, so I wonder if he's retired. Because that was like 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's old, but not old. Like, he'd be in his 60s. But, like we said, maybe he's just like the quality over quantity approach. He's got 10 pretty solid movies. Although, or maybe it's like 9, because I think Eros is technically an anthology that has multiple directors in it, and he just does one sequence. I think. Yeah, it's not on the list here, so I'm getting a few things mixed up. So maybe that isn't part of no, that's not part of the 10 anyway. So when I was saying 10, that didn't count Arrows, so you don't have to worry about that. Again, we have As Tears Go By, Days of Being Wild, Chungking Express, Ashes of Time, Fallen Angels, Happy to what an interesting run. He went from Chungking Express, which is like a drama in the Vegas sense, but it's kind of part crime thriller, part romantic comedy, part drama. Ashes of Time, which is sort of like a period wuxia piece. Happy Together, which is a romantic drama, but it is different because it has homosexual leads. And then worked up to In the Mood for Love, which is again a romantic drama, but sort of also a period piece. Interesting. I think I've seen parts of My Blueberry Nights, which has, non-Chinese actors in it. Jude Law's in there, Natalie Portman.
Oh yeah.
That's his first. English language feature. Nora Jones is in there because she was a thing briefly in the 2000s. It's funny. I didn't say it when I was talking about Tony Leung having that one scene in a lot of movies. He has like a smoldering sexuality, at least when he was younger. Like Jude Law, I think, kind of had that a bit too when he was younger.
No, I could see it.
So it's kind of interesting that he would eventually direct Jude Law. But yeah, I forgot about that because like a lot of these directors that we've talked about did eventually, like somebody like Ang Lee, of course, did a bunch of English language movies eventually. But it's interesting that Wong Kar-Wai got around to doing an English language movie with Western actors. I haven't really heard anything about it. Rachel Weisz is in there too. I haven't really heard if it's good or bad or sounds interesting. I think for a long time I did not know, it had a Chinese director. I don't think I realized that at the time back when I heard about it. It's one of those movies that sort of disappeared. It came out in 2007. Hadn't thought about it. But that was his first, I guess you would say an only English thing because then he did The Grand Master quite a few years later, 2013, and he hasn't done one since. So I'm not really sure where his career stands now.
Yeah, I don't know what the desire is to want to do an English language film for these guys. It must just be something like a badge on the chest or something. Just like something to say you did.
Yeah, I mean, in the case of people like Ong Lee and John Woo, I mean, for them, it really became their career for a long time. John Woo did eventually go back and return
Yeah,
to making
John
Chinese
Woo's
movies.
probably the standout that kind of stayed doing English language for a while.
But he did return. Whereas Ong Lee, I don't even know what his last movie was. Was it Chinese? I'll have to look into that.
I think it was.
Okay, so Ong Lee returned too.
Yeah.
Ong Lee, of course, is a little different because he is a Taiwanese filmmaker. I will make that distinction. China, leave Taiwan the fuck alone.
Gonna get our video taken down.
I know they're gonna shut us down. They've got YouTube blocked.
Yeah,
So.
they have their own version of YouTube, I think.
Well, it doesn't mean their government can't watch it. I'm sure their government can watch YouTube, but their citizens can't. But Ong Lee, it's also interesting that Ong Lee did Lust Caution, which is almost like Ong Lee saw In the Mood for Love and was like, I'm going to do that too. Because Lust Caution is also like an erotic drama thing set in like set around that time. I think it's like almost the same setting, isn't it? Like World War II Shanghai or something.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I just think it's interesting. And he's like, look, I can do a sexy thriller too. Let's see here. Oh, he did Gemini Man. His last movie was he hasn't gone back.
Oh, he hasn't gone
back. Lust Caution is the last. I think the last Chinese movie. Yeah, see, it is. It's Hong Kong. Yeah, Hong Kong. Hong Kong and Shanghai when they were occupied by the Japanese army during the World War II. So yeah, he did Life of Pi in 2012. But yeah, it makes me kind of sad. Like maybe Gemini Man's good, but I kind of doubt it.
I've heard it's not a great movie, but it looks beautiful. Like it looks really good in 4K.
Yeah,
transfer.
All his movies look good, except maybe Hulk. Hulk doesn't look good. Yeah. Hulk looks like crap.
Yeah, we'll give him that one. That was maybe a sign.
Anytime we bring up Hulk, I still kind of respect Hulk for trying in a really different thing, kind of going an artistic direction with it. I just feel like it fails, but it's not a good looking movie. It looks like shit. Some of it's the effects, but I don't know.
I didn't think Bruce Banner was a good choice, even though I think he's a good actor. I didn't like him for Bruce Banner. I forget his name. Australian guy, I believe.
Another interesting parallel between Ong Lee and Wong Kar-Wai is that even before Wong Kar-Wai did his, remember that in 1993, Ong Lee did The Wedding Banquet, which also had gay main characters. So
is Ong Lee is he gay? He's dealt with the subject matter a good bit. Not that it matters. I'm just curious.
Oh no, it might say. Yeah, because you're right. Because obviously he did the big one. Like we said, it took a Chinese or a foreign director, Taiwanese director, to do the big debut of a Western gay romance with Brokeback Mountain. Personal life. No, he's not gay.
Okay. He's just fabulous.
Yeah, or he's closeted. I don't know. Because I mean, lots of people are married with kids and still gay. So take that for what it's worth. There's nothing that says he's gay, and it says he's married and has kids. But I don't know.
Maybe.
But yeah, that's interesting that both did in the 90s, very sort of ahead of their times. Movies with gay main characters with gay relationships in it, and then both also did sexy thrillers set in like occupied China.
It makes it more hot when you're always at risk of being killed,
right? Because it's like it's like espionage and all that stuff,
right? We're spies.
Agents that, like might betray each other or whatever. Because let's see. Because In the Mood for Love actually is set a little after that. It's not quite the same. I do get some things about it mixed up. Because actually it's in like the 60s. So it's not quite the same atmosphere. Sometimes I do get that mixed up. So just to be clear, Caution Lust is the one with the spies, whereas In the Mood for Love is it's harder to explain the setting and sort of the stakes, but it's more like a Cold War thing than occupied China is kind of what it is, I guess. Yeah, like Lust Caution has more of the espionage stuff. I guess there's technically not espionage, I don't think, in the other one. It's just sort of an atmosphere of kind of oppression and things. I don't know. Need to see both again. In the Mood for Love is another one that is on Crave there for me. So since I managed to get through this one, maybe I can do this one. I will have to say that whole scene with the ex-girlfriend did bring up some feelings.
Yeah, I can imagine. And she was a bit of a bitch too.
His
Well,
ex,
not a bit, quite a bit of a bitch.
the ex.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, I
With
would be
the
really devastated if I had an encounter like that where she's all sweet and kind of flirty and flaunting how hot she is, and then just leaves
well,
on the back of the motors. I mean,
and
I get it,
you'll pay for my
and you'll
pay
pay
for
for it.
my
Yeah,
stuff.
she's like, oh well, you'll pay for it, and then she jumps on the motorcycle with her rugged dude. Yeah, that would have just like demolished me. I have to say. So I mean, I've had some bad encounters, but at least nothing quite like that. Yet there's still time. That's another thing you learn as you get older. There's always time for more things to devastate you or humiliate you. You don't outgrow that. I also need to watch the Grandmaster again because like I said, the Grandmaster is so artistic and beautiful. Like I think it kind of caught me off guard at the time because I was thinking it's another Ip Man film. Okay, here we go. It's
Yeah.
not like there isn't fighting in it. There's fighting in
If
it. Tony Leung is another person kind of like Michelle Yeoh. Tony Leung was never like a professional martial artist with a lot of training. It was something he picked up as he did the movies, but he does some good martial arts. And in 2013, Tony Leung's not a young man in 2013. Of course, he's not playing a young man. He's playing sort of an older version of Ip Man. But if you're gonna put on a list of like people that aren't like pro martial artists but perform well in movies, Tony Leung's right up there.
well, if you're
I
going
just
into
watched
that
him in Hero.
if you're expecting another Ip Man film, you may be a little disappointed because it's not that.
No.
It's not. It's a
But
good
it,
movie.
yeah, and I mean it still has its actiony scenes and things, although they're more like classic wuxia than the sort of more modern hard kicking stuff we got to see people like um, Donnie Yen engage in. Anyway, was there some other business you wanted to get to before we finished on this? Any current
Not
topics
really.
or anything? I'm trying to think of like
No.
horror. This being October, I still hope I can see Barbarian at some point. I think
I
that's still
enjoyed
at
it
my
quite a
theater.
bit. Yeah.
This isn't horror, but I was super annoyed because I really wanted to see the Fletch movie, and it's not playing anywhere here. And I'm not
Fletch,
paying yeah. There's a
like
Fletch movie.
the Chevy Chase Fletch.
Well, it's the same
They
character, but
remade it. They remade Fletch.
no, they made
Oh,
a
I had
new
no idea.
Fletch. Okay, well, for those who aren't as familiar, yeah, Chevy Chase did two movies in the 80s. He did Fletch and he did Fletch Lives. Both were loosely based on books about a character named Fletch. This new one is supposed to be a lot closer to the books. In fact, it's based directly on one of the books. It's called Confess Fletch. If you want to know who Fletch is, it's John Hamm. Now, a lot of people are used to the movies, so they say, I don't know. But the truth is, Fletch is a character from a book, and Chevy Chase's Fletch is Chevy Chase's Fletch. It's not in any way that close or anything. It's Chevy Chase doing his own thing. So people want to say John Hamm isn't right for it because he's not like Chevy Chase. That's not really the point. He's not supposed to be like Chevy Chase. So I like the first Fletch. I know I've seen the second Fletch, but I don't really remember it. But yeah, I'm really interested to see this movie. It looks good. But it's not playing fucking anywhere, and I'm not paying like $24.99 to rent the goddamn thing, which is what my option is. So I'll have to wait for that one. So anyway, I know that's not horror, but I was really annoyed because I thought for sure, oh, that'll be at a theater around here somewhere. I can go see it. Actually, this has been in the works for a long time. There was a time when Miramax had it, and Kevin Smith wanted to direct it, and he was going to have Jason Lee do it, which would have been interesting.
Of course. I like Jason Lee, but I mean, come on. Kevin Smith cannot get out of his comfort zone with actors, man.
I know, because if it wasn't him, it would have been Affleck.
I guess his experience is Bruce Willis, and that didn't go well, so.
It didn't. I mean, he's had the odd good. I mean, he obviously did really well with Seth Rogen, but you can see why because they have similar, things where they can bond over. Yeah, but somebody like Bruce Willis, it's pretty hard to have like a big established star, I guess. But I don't know. Clerks 3 is out right now.
Yeah,
I
haven't
like
seen it yet.
Clerks, and I like Clerks 2. It makes, and I mean, I think I just thought Clerks 2 was such a really good ending. It's another one of those. I thought that was a really satisfying, good ending point. Like, why pick it up years later?
I will be shocked if it's any good. Clerks 3.
I
Just
mean,
because
yeah, he's
Kevin
fall.
Smith is not the same guy he was
No,
even 10 years ago.
yeah, he's really fallen off. I mean, I'll always like him for those movies because I liked him a lot. Mallrats is one of my favorite comedies ever.
Sure.
I love Clerks.
Mallrats is probably my
Like I
favorite
said,
of his films.
mine too. I like Dogma a lot. And like I said, I was even in 2006 when they made Clerks 2, I was like, is this a good idea? And then they made it. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
actually, really good. I don't feel like that's going to happen again, but I don't know. But yeah, like I said, I'd rather go see Confess Fletch than Clerks 3, but I might wind up seeing Clerks 3 because that's what's available to me.
Yeah,
but I want to see Barbarian. There's at least one other horror movie, and I don't mean Halloween, which is obviously coming out in a second. What's the other? There's another horror movie in theaters.
You haven't seen Pearl? Yeah, Smile, but
I haven't seen Pearl or Smile or Barbarian.
I would go see Pearl before you see Smile. Just Smile's not bad. It's just kind of generic.
I hadn't heard anything about Smile. And then I heard like they had that weird marketing campaign where people went and just like grinned and like
yeah.
The good thing about all those three of those movies though is like I'm not sure if I'll see them, so I know nothing about any of them. I don't know the plots. I know nothing. I know their titles. That's it. So, and that's how I want to kind of keep it because I want to enter a movie that way. I kind of want to go in not knowing anything.
If we didn't have this tonight, I would have seen something, but tomorrow I want to go see Barbarian before it leaves theaters again. Saw it when it came out, and then I want to see Amsterdam on Friday.
I haven't heard of that one.
Oh, sure you have.
I have?
Christian Bale. Oh, you name it. Chris Rock. It's got a stellar cast.
I mean, I've missed a lot of movies lately. Like they've come and gone before I had a chance. Like I wanted to see Everything Everywhere All at Once or whatever. I think that's already gone.
It is. It's supposed to be really good though.
Yeah, Michelle Yeoh's in that. Speaking of her and her awesome career, what's I gonna say? I've had her on the brain a lot lately. Her birthday wasn't too long ago. People were making tributes to her, and then of course I recently finally got Police Story 3 Super Cop. Oh. So satisfying to finally
you got the Blu-ray, right?
Yeah,
that's cool.
So nice to finally have it. Not that it's a huge deal, but the DVD that was always available all those years, the American version, it's not like it was a huge deal, but it does cut 5 minutes out. It's only 5 minutes, and none of it's action. It's all talking stuff, but still good to have the full thing. Getting back to talking about how, in 97, Hong Kong rejoined China, and it was sort of the end of an era. It's interesting that movie, and this is the stuff they cut really, is some of the characters talking about it. The movie came out in 1992, but at that point they knew in 5 years it was going to happen. The movie is kind of a naive little idea that like it'll all go smoothly and everybody will get along, which is, I mean, all these years later is just not what happened. But that is kind of what the movie's about, because it's about a Hong Kong cop played by Jackie getting enlisted to work with the mainland cops, and about how they're different, but they can see, they can get along. It kind of has that sunny optimism to it. And unfortunately, that's not really how history has worked out. But anyway, that's some of the stuff that talks about that is not in the original English language version or even a cut of the movie. They cut that out. So it's not like anything awesome got cut or anything essential, but it is good to have some of the context added back into the movie. I mean, I don't want to go on about Hong Kong action and Jackie again, but I mean, it is staggering how good that movie is, because we did the first two Police Stories and they're both like such masterpieces. And the third one, there've been a break of a few years and it's a bit different now. And he's going to share the spotlight with somebody, Michelle Yeoh, and it's just so good. And it's another escalation too, because unlike the other two movies, it actually has a lot of gunfighting in it and things like that. And also, unlike those movies, it's moves location. Like it all ends in what is it, like Singapore or whatever? But and a lot of it is shot in Thailand too. So, and yet it all works so well. And also, it's the first one that Jackie himself didn't direct. At that time, he'd passed it on to Stanley Tong. And Stanley Tong would be the only guy I think is the only It's funny. Jackie was fine with not directing anymore because he realized he's spreading himself too thin and can only do so many things. But that didn't mean he meshed well with directors. I think to this day, Stanley Tong is the only director to have like directed Jackie twice, except for who is it, Brett Ratner or whoever who did the Rush Hours. I think they're the only directors that have the distinction of directing Jackie more than once, because usually he does not really get along with directors because of his own experiences. But anyway, Stanley Tong, he was a really interesting choice for it too, because at that point, I don't know if he directed anything, but one of the reasons why he was good for that movie is because he was a performer, stunt performer like Jackie. I forgot to point this out at the time, since we're on it, and then we'll wrap. But you go back not too long, Jay and I finally got around to doing a live commentary of Rumble in the Bronx, which was also directed by Stanley Tong. It was the next movie they did together after Super Cop 3. But one thing I forgot to point out is that we were talking about that awesome jump that Jackie does, where he jumps from a rooftop onto a fire escape on an opposing building. And they show it 3 times. Well, not to ruin Jackie's myth or anything like that, but Jackie isn't the only one who did that. The other person who did that was Stanley Tong himself. So when you're watching the 3 shots of it, I think 2 are Jackie and 1 is him. So it's not just one of those things where you're seeing the same shot but from different angles. It's 3 different times, and one of them is Stanley Tong himself. So that's pretty fucking impressive. So he was a big time stunt performer too. So yeah, not to ruin the myth for anybody, that whole Jackie does all his own stunts all the time thing. It's not strictly true. He's been doubled, but I don't think that takes anything away because he still did amazing things. And for instance, after we all know during that movie, he like broke his ankle, right? And he had to finish it. So for his next movie, Thunderbolt, he got doubled a bunch in Thunderbolt, which is not his fault. It's because he couldn't do stuff because he was injured. So
he was still healing, I'm sure.
Yeah. So there are some things, very few, but there are things, of course, where Jackie has been doubled. But I don't think it really takes away from his aura or anything, because most of them are things that he probably could do anyway. They're just trying to like help him out a little.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for instance, there's this really complicated kick he does in a sequence in Dragons Forever. And I've seen takes of it, and he's doing it, but they just felt like it doesn't look good enough. So they got somebody else to do it because he could do it a little cleaner. I don't think that like ruins the movie for him or anything else that they got somebody else to do the kick.
I don't think getting stunt people to do the stunts is anything to.
No, it's just that he built up this.
Of.
He just built up this image of the guy that always does his own stunts. And I mean, not always, but I mean, still the biggest stuff, like the most dramatic stuff, it is him. When he's going down the pole, in Police Story, that's him. I mean, when he jumped off onto the ferry, that's him. He broke his ankle. All those big things, they're still him.
But like Tom Cruise gets all this credit, right? Lately, the past decade or so for doing his own stunts. But is he really? I mean, no way they're going to have insurance to cover that on that set,
I don't know. I mean, it's interesting because he really got a taste for it, of course, doing the Mission Impossibles. And of course, John Woo, since we're being topical, he directed Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible 2. Oh. And he doesn't have any reason to lie, because they asked him. He said, I was terrified because for that opening, Tom Cruise is just climbing that, rock, without anything. There's no safety. There's nothing. He's like, I just got here and I'm going to be the director that killed Tom Cruise, but I had to let him do it.
It seems so, I just can't believe it.
It's just Tom Cruise having his way, I guess. I can believe it just because he's obsessive. Because he kind of went from, I'm a good actor to like, I'm the ultimate stunt performer. So I assume at a certain point, just, people did double for him. He got to a point where he's like, not acceptable. Nobody can double for me. I kind of do believe it. I don't believe it because I think he's awesome. I believe it because I think he's obsessive.
I guess worst case scenario, you die during filming and you're martyred for all time because you're the ultimate badass, right?
I guess so. I mean, age has to catch up with him eventually, although it hasn't yet. Maybe he thinks a glorious death will be better than age. Seeing him get old. I don't know. Thanks for thinking about the fans, Tom. I don't know.
Yeah. How old is that guy now? Is he in his 60s?
He's not 60 yet, but he's late 50s. It won't be long till he's 60. He's close.
Oh, shit. He's 60. Turned 60
Oh,
in
he is
July.
60. He just turned 60. Okay. I thought maybe he was like 58 or something. So there you go. 60. Pretty good, Tom. We're all proud of you. Anyway, those tangents worked because we got to mention other Asian filmmakers and things, I suppose, etc. But we can circle back and finish up here on Chungking Express. Which, if I was going to make a movie of like really, not a movie, a list of like important films of the 90s, I would have to include it. And it's not just because, I feel like I have to include something Chinese either. It's interesting because I feel like even though it is a Chinese film and it's very Hong Kong centered, it shares a lot in common with something like a Reality Bites or something.
Yeah.
Which came out, I think,
Absolutely.
the same year. Because even on the other side of the world in a different culture, there was still sort of a similar feel to things. And of course, the Western soundtrack helps out with that a lot, right? Like the songs are all Western songs. I think there's some dream pop in there, which is interesting because the Cocteau Twins had done dream pop since like the late '80s. At some point, Fei Wu started collaborating with them, and she started sort of turning her canto pop into a dream pop thing. And it kind of was like she already had a pretty good career, but it sort of helped like branch her career out more. It's pretty interesting stuff. I've always been a fan of dream. Not always. That's not true. As an adult, more like in the last like 10 years, I've gotten into dream pop.
I'm not very familiar with it.
Dream pop is just
Check it
basically
out.
exactly what it sounds like. It's basically like what's the exact opposite, like sonically, of like I don't know, like doom metal. It's like dream pop. It's light. It's airy. The vocals are very clean and pleasant, and almost always I think they're always female. I don't think there's
Okay.
anything, you know. So yeah, but the Cocteau Twins are a good example, but there's others. Let me think for a second here of something else that would qualify as dream pop, just because I can't let things go. But it's the very lovely kind of stuff. It's the type of stuff you could like fall asleep listening to.
Right.
Basically, it's very soft and pleasant.
Not like a J-pop or a K-pop type. It's more of a subdued version of that, I guess.
Right, and it actually does have its roots a little more in rock. Like if you listen to like some various like say shoegaze stuff, that
Okay.
definitely sags into dream pop. Now, shoegaze
Gotcha.
might have different kind of vocals. It might have the more
Sure.
rough traditional male rock vocal, but a lot of like the sound you'll hear like in some of maybe say an early, well, the classic of course, My Bloody Valentine, things like that will have stuff. What's interesting is, do you remember? I always think of them. I always make the distinction. There's dream pop, and then there might be like rock. I just call it dream rock. Remember, we talked about this band before. Remember the Church, the Australian band, the Church. We talked about them because they were on the soundtrack of a movie we covered on here, Donnie Darko. And they did that song "Under the Milky Way." I always think of that as like dream rock. Like it's not dream pop because it's rock and roll and it's male vocals, but it's very dreamy sounding.
I'll have
Not
to go
just
look
that
it up.
song.
I know I listened to some of them when we were talking about it around
Yeah.
that time.
Under the Milky Way is a very famous song. It's been used in like car commercials for decades because it just has that great vibe for driving a car at night. I think I know you're right. What's interesting is like, okay, think of like Deftones. Deftones is kind of like an alternative metal version of dream pop in some ways, in the way Chino does like those sort of floaty high vocals and how they do sort of an ambient sound thing.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, dream pop never got like mainstream appeal, but they've always been on the edge of things. Like again, speaking of shoegaze, some Radiohead can go into that kind of again. I don't know. As far as straight dream pop, nothing really became nothing became mainstream. But there's stuff that touched the edges of it. Mazzy Star, for instance, I suppose.
Okay.
Yeah. But anyway, what it was around this time, I guess, when the soundtrack was being put together. Faye, who had been like exposed to some of it, and it inspired her to like make her canto pop kind of like dream pop esque, which is one of the reasons why she's always stood out to me. Again, by always, I mean the last several years, not back in the 90s. I did not know anything about canto pop in the 1990s. Like that. But yes, it's very soft, pleasant music you could fall asleep to, usually with high female vocals. Fun stuff. But something like Mazzy Star, it's like shoegaze, psychedelic rock, dream pop, kind of put together. But yeah, I always think of like shoegaze is the closest thing to dream pop, like with male vocals. I would probably say because usually like pure dream pop, it would have like high, airy female. But anyway, so yeah, so as I was getting back to my original point, yeah, the movie I think is a really great slice of the '90s. Even if it's the other side of the world, you still have that '90s vibe going through it. Um, yeah, it was well past time that we did this director. Wong Kar-Wai. And as I said, it might be interesting to at some point do a series on Hong Kong film period, and maybe we that way would also give us an excuse to eventually touch on one of his other films because he definitely has several other films I think will be worth doing on here. But we're not in a series now, so that won't be next because we have to sort some things out before we do any series. But I had some ideas and a couple that I haven't even spoken to Jay with yet about, so I'm not going to spring them on him or anybody else right now because this is all in the developmental stage. But yeah, I think I would have to include this on any sort of list of like sort of like essential '90s movies. Just has a great feel to it. I really do disagree with Roger Ebert. I think the substance of the film has more to recommend it than he says because he just seems to think, well, yeah, I like the style and I like the artistic choices, but as far as like story characters, I don't really care. I like the story of characters. You know, there's some cliches in there. There's some maybe loose ends or things that don't line up perfectly, but to me, that makes it a little more real feeling in a way. I, which is what I like best whenever you're going to have romance in a movie, because I just can't stand like, I don't know, formulaic romances. I like how these aren't too formulaic, how they don't really fit neatly into, I don't know, what maybe your expectations would be. And I like how there's all sorts of things that are unsaid between the characters that kind of leave you wondering about things. I don't know. I really like the movie. I'm really glad we got around to doing it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, glad I got to watch it again. It's been quite a while for me too, probably at least a decade,
Yeah,
if
me
not
too. It's been
longer.
so long that I really didn't remember anything. Like I knew it was like two stories and there were cops, and that was kind of it.
Yeah.
But great performances all around. I mean, Bridget Lin didn't have to do much, so I'm not. It's not like I'm not saying her performance is amazing, but I mean, I've seen her, do more acting in other movies. Like, but that's what the role called for. She's supposed to be sort of curt and serious and not talk much. But I don't know. I felt like all the other characters were very fully formed. Felt very real. They didn't feel like
Hmm.
archetypes. I know they had their quirks and stuff. Like I said, she's a manic pixie dream girl, but that didn't mean she didn't have any personality beyond it. I thought I liked her choice of deciding to just sort of leave and strike out on her own instead of maybe the predictable thing like, oh, maybe I can start a relationship with this guy and that'll fulfill me or complete me. There's at least none of that garbage. The guys are both lovesick and definitely missing having partners, but I don't know. There's also again there's sort of the optimism of our first cop that feels like after this encounter maybe he can feel better going forward and try to love again. I don't know. It's kind of bullshit when you say it out loud, but that's just how it goes whenever you're talking about romance and things like that. Eventually something's going to sound syrupy and stupid, but I don't know. Sometimes you just give in to those things. I do because there's things in the movie I can directly relate to, like how I felt in a moment or something, or how I reacted and things like that. But and I know for somebody like Roger Ebert, no, he couldn't relate to any of it. But that doesn't mean, I don't know, you could just dismiss the story and character out of hand. Because I like the stories and characters.
Typical Roger Ebert
Yeah.
is.
I mean, he can be so insightful when it comes to certain things, and then he just has huge blind spots when it comes to other things. And I mean, nobody's perfect. I guess if I was a film critic, I would have blind spots too. I don't know. I try to open my eyes as much as I can and take in. I mean, that's kind of what Jay and I are doing here.
Yeah.
We were both lifelong fans of film, but the show also helps us dig a little
Hmm.
deeper into other corners and areas, and it's fun to share that with other people, which is really what we're all about.
Yeah. I've watched a lot of stuff I probably wouldn't have watched otherwise, and I'm glad I saw. So, that's
Yeah.
that's one of the positive things about doing this with you.
As we said when we were looking, I do every once in a while check out that list. But for the most part, I don't think about it until I realize, oh, we've done another one that's on there. Like we don't actually have the list and say let's pick from there.
Yeah,
Although I have looked it up a few times. It's also changed. There's also a couple different versions of the list because it's been updated a few
there
times over
are.
the years.
Yeah,
So some things have moved off and some things have been added on. So I don't even know what the latest version of the list I looked at was. It wasn't that recent. It might have been like 10 years ago.
well, because they have to keep adding new films to it, so they have to knock
Yeah.
older films off. But
Yeah. So
um,
if you want to look that up, I would suggest people, look up different versions just so you can see what might have been lost or what's been added because that's interesting in itself.
mhm.
The list itself, there's nothing official about it. It's just something some people made up. It's not the same thing as like Sight and Sound's like official list of best movies or BFI or anything like that. But it is an interesting thing and an interesting guide to use.
Mhm.
But usually we don't really think about it until like we have a movie and then we find out, oh, it's actually on there too. So
It's a good read. I don't really pull it out unless I know a film we're doing is on there. I'll go read about it, but it's not one I'm just going to pick up and thumb through
yeah,
because it's a big book.
yeah.
I mean, it's a
I mean,
damn
it's
phone book, man.
well, what makes it interesting is because it really is what the title says. So, because you can look up movies that are like expected to be on a list of greatest because critically they're considered greatest. So, you're going to see that. But this list is a mix of those and movies that are just kind of considered like really great watches too. So, it's a mix of critically popular stuff and just popular stuff. There's plenty of movies on the list that are also considered just sort of like popcorn movies that are just more fun type thing is on there. So, the list is interesting from that perspective because it's not just going, all critical acclaim or all box office or all being deep and meaningful. It's a mix of those kinds of movies and, maybe the less serious, more fun type of movies. There's definitely some movies that are on the list that don't really have a lot of substance, but, they have some element that makes them fun or something. So the list is fun from that perspective too because it has a serious side, but it also has a less serious side. So it sets it apart
Mhm.
from other kinds of lists where usually it's just sort of like greatest films. And if you have been around in film for a while, you can almost expect what's going to be on there. Where this list is a mix of a few different elements when it comes to like how people rate or grade films, what you
Mhm.
would consider worth watching. Because there's a lot of movies out there that like I'm not really necessarily going to have much to say about or fan, but I will say it was worth watching because it brought something. There was some element in it that was entertaining or something that made it
Right,
worthwhile.
right,
Maybe it wasn't great. Maybe I'm not even going to revisit it, but there was at least something where I didn't feel like my time was wasted.
right.
And I mean, there's so many movies where I know I'm wasting time watching it, but I don't know. Sometimes we're in
Well,
the mood for that too, especially if I'm
yeah,
tired. Right? If I'm tired,
yeah.
I'd rather just put on something that I know I don't have to care that much about. So
Well, I look at it two different ways. Like one, like me actually rating it as far as how the film is, not necessarily how I enjoyed it. And then also films that I personally enjoy. I know a lot of them are shit. I can admit that, but
yeah, I mean that's basically how I rate stuff on. I mean, I figure that's you're supposed to rate stuff on Flickchart. I know my favorite movies aren't the best movies of all time, but they're my favorites. And I mean,
right.
everybody's like that. I'm always interested in how people score stuff on Letterboxd too. It seems to say a lot about them because I think I score it the way most people do, which is if you look at thing, most of my movies score right in the middle because most movies
I
are
know.
average. Most movies are average, but then there are the people out there that are a feast or famine. It's either like five
It's
stars every time, or like they'll give
every
it one
time.
star because or 1 star because they hated it. I was like, there's stars in between, right? Like,
I
not
know.
every movie you saw was the greatest thing you've ever seen or the worst piece of shit you ever saw, but some people just seem to be all or nothing when it comes to how they. And I'm again, that's their. There's. I'm not going to tell them they're
Sure, sure.
wrong, but it is kind of surprising because I can't imagine that. I can't imagine feeling that strongly about every single thing I watch, where I loved it or I despised
Yeah,
it. Because most of it's just like, oh, I kind of liked it, or I didn't really like it. A lot of it is that. I mean, that's kind of life.
yeah. I've seen a lot of that. Oh, worst movie ever made, and I just want to be like, you need to watch some more movies
You need to watch some
because
more movies.
there's a lot more.
Because yeah, when I talk about movies I really hate, like I mean, maybe sometimes it isn't rational, but I think a lot of them, yeah.
Right.
I think given what I've seen and what I can compare things to, I was like, yeah, that was terrible, and I've seen way worse.
Well, like not to go on a tangent here, but like Joker. Like you hated Joker, but
I
a
hated
lot of
Joker,
people
but
love Joker.
but I know it's not one of the worst films ever made. You know,
Right, right.
I I hate it for a lot of like personal reasons. I don't necessarily think like it's just a complete failure of a movie. I
One
don't know. But yeah,
star.
yeah. I mean, I gave it a pretty low rate. I gave it a pretty low rating, but I didn't give it 1 star. I might have given it 2 stars
I mean, yeah.
because that is one I
We
am emotion. That is what I am emotional about because of its
we,
subject matter, right? Like I
we've
care
talked
about
about
that.
that
I
one
care
enough.
about the Batman mythos a lot. Yeah,
Yeah.
we have. So we'll leave it up. But I mean, I care about the Batman mythos a lot. So yeah, I do have a lot of venom for that.
Mm-hmm.
But rationally, I know there are still some redeemable things about it that even with my bias, I can still see there are redeemable things. But yeah.
It's fun. I don't know if it's a Reddit thread or something, but you can go see like bad letterbox reviews. I don't know if they're done intentionally, but man,
Right.
there's some bad ones on there that are, you know.
I see a lot of letterbox reviews that are just like one-line jokes, and they get like so many likes. I'm like, who are? I'm like, these people aren't funny. So like, do they just already have a lot of followers to begin with? So I don't know, because
Like
I'm just like,
my
I refuse to believe your joke is that funny. It's like because sometimes I might do something like I'll do the short one where I make a snarky comment too, but I don't know. At least
sure.
I don't know.
My in-laws, they were always all about like set changing. They were like, and the whole movie was in one room. I'm like, yeah, that's the point.
Yeah,
Look at
that's
what
an
they did
interesting
with the
thing.
one room. You know, the room is a character, but you know, they moving all around. They're over here, they're over there. It's a great movie.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because yeah, I
Um,
mean, as far as those like single location movies go, I mean, it's just like anything. There's some truly great ones for sure. Rear Window is probably the most famous,
he was
but
on the island for 75% of the movie.
but yeah, I don't think I've ever judged a movie by how much it did or didn't
No,
change location.
I mean, if anything, it speaks how well done it is if it can achieve that in a single setting. You know, like
Yeah.
phone booth or something. I know that's not exactly in one setting. I can't think of a good example, but
Well, Hitchcock did a few.
yeah.
Rope, Lifeboat, and the aforementioned Rear Window. So he was kind of a master at it. 12 Angry Men's basically single location.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I know there are newer ones. I'm just hitting on the classics. But yeah, I mean, if that's what the story is, I'm not going to hold it against it as long as it's a well-made movie. It's kind of the same thing I say about length. Like some people get mad at movies are like long. I'm just like, if it's good, it's as long as it needs to be. But if it's bad, you'll feel like that extra length will definitely work against it. I think there's such thing as like a 4-hour movie that's really good. It's rare, but it
Sure.
can happen.
Yeah, like that last Batman movie felt like it was a bit too long.
I can see
Liked it.
that.
I
There's
liked it,
things
but
I liked it a lot too, but I actually agree. There's things I think you could trim. Most of it was Catwoman stuff. I didn't hate, by the way, I don't want people once again to get the wrong impression. I didn't hate Catwoman. I just thought, like, honestly, you could even do the movie without her. Like, I felt like she was not really that important to the plot. I realize you could say, how could you say that? Because what's his name's her father? I don't know. I feel like you still could have done it without it. Not saying they should have. So again, don't mistake me. But yeah, but I have to say, I liked it. I've already watched that movie about 6 times. And,
wow.
Yeah.
I need to watch it again.
I'm
Probably
sure I'll
won't
watch.
anytime
I'm sure I'll
soon.
watch
But
it again before Christmas.
what's the they're not doing a sequel to that, right? They've already said they're not doing that.
I don't
Is
know.
that right?
They've been kind of coy. I don't know what to believe. I've heard they are. I've heard they aren't.
'Cause, I mean, it was successful, but
It definitely should be followed up on.
you you really can't argue that if it wasn't going straight to streaming as well. Didn't it go to streaming right out? Right? Yeah, I believe so. I think it went
Pretty
to or maybe
fast. I did.
the next
I
week.
did see it. I did see it in the theater, but I remember seeing it on streaming really fast afterwards.
Yeah, I did too.
But I'm glad I got to see it in the theater.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, that'll probably do.
Yep.
So thanks
That'll
for
do,
joining us
pig.
for Chungking Express. I know a couple people said on the chat that they'd seen it. A couple people said they hadn't even heard of it. So I don't know if you hadn't heard of it. Maybe it's worth checking out. I don't know. I know that Jay and I jump around, but we did try to get into sort of discussions about it. And I know we did some spoilers there too, but I think it's still an enjoyable movie, even if some of it has been spoiled.
Yeah.
But I mean, we always do full spoilers on these shows so that we can fully get into things. Because if you're holding off for spoilers, it limits too much. So that's always been our policy for these movies. So if anybody ever again, the thing is, we do these live, but they exist. You can always check them out later. So go watch the movie, come back, see what
Absolutely.
you think.
And thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you next time.
Thanks a lot. Have a good night.